Honorable members, when the business of the House suspended, the honorable member for Elizabeth appears to have reserved the floor. Oh, correction. Thank you. The honorable member for North Andros and the Berry Islands. Yes, I remember. Was next in line.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Andros and the Berry Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the people of the great constituency of North Andros and the Berry Islands. But first, I want to thank the Almighty God for allowing me to be here today, Mr. Speaker, to stand in this honorable House, bring a contribution forward on the resolution in which North Andros and the Berry Islands do definitely will be with this resolution, sir. Agree with this. But Mr. Speaker, it's amazing how we began to talk and say so much about this pandemic and forget what matters most, which is the people. People in this great country, Mr. Speaker. Not only in the walls here of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, but also around this whole country. And we talk and we come in here, and in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, we kind of oppose the fact because we know what the facts is. I mean, we can Google the facts if we want to about this pandemic, actually what is going on in the world. But as it is, when you have opposition, you expect for them to oppose. But now is not the time, Mr. Speaker. This is time for us to come together as one. I can recall the honorable member for Kalani standing right in this honorable House, asking those on the opposing side, including the honorable member for Cat Island and San Salvador and Ramkey, inviting him to a meeting, not just with him, but PAHO, which is the Pan American Health Organization, along with the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, advising as to what is taking place globally and what effects it will have on this country. But Mr. Speaker, they did not choose to come and show up to that. For whatever reason, to rebut, they did that. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, that this is not a fight for government. This is not a fight for opposition. This is a fight for us to do together, Mr. Speaker. Because I realize that this virus doesn't have a color of red, yellow, green, whatever other color is out there. This is affecting every one of us. It doesn't matter whether you're F&M or PLP or DNA or BND or UBP, it don't matter. Everybody is dying from this when you look at it of all walks of the political persuasion. So when you want to talk about going out and having a large crowd together because you want political gains, one must wonder exactly where you are as far as a statesman or someone just looking for brownie points. In which I say, Mr. Speaker, you must all be concerned now about this time during the fall and the winter season, when this pandemic is going to take a surge and we will have record-breaking numbers with people affected not only here in the Bahamas, but globally. You're now seeing it in Europe and also in North America. So, Mr. Speaker, I would say the worst is yet to come. But I would also say this, Mr. Speaker, there is hope. In my opinion, there is hope. And with God on our side, we will weather the storm. But Mr. Speaker, you see, when you have the facts being given, and you have someone else given reasonable doubt, you wonder where that will all end, when it will all end. Because even though the election season is upon us, that's all well and good. But we must first understand we have to get there. We can't get there carelessly by those who oppose saying, oh, the government is failing. You know why the government is failing to you? Because you lack of education of what's going on, because you don't want to listen to the people who are leading this fight with this pandemic. But yet the things that you have, and that is so amazing to say that are points to look at on COVID-19 site, has all been laid out right here before you with this government. So who are you fooling? Why not come to the meetings? Why not let us fight this dangerous virus together? Why not? After all, we still have the numbers increasing here in Nassau, where the hospitalization remains to elevate. Mr. Speaker, we have continued to add to this capacity that is now increasing more than ever. And thanks to the Samaritan Purse, we now have 28 new additional beds in place to help our people who are infected with this virus. Mr. Speaker, the way how I look at it, in my opinion, if we continue to do the work that is needed and follow the protocol that is put in place, and let me get it straight to the people out there, even though the side opposite is trying to paint a picture about the competent authority. The competent authority has always came to this house and is not represented by one individual. They have a cabinet that consults and also have a committee. And with the advice from the health authorities, do what is needed and what is best for the Bahamian people. But that being said, Mr. Speaker, there's always a way to spin this around and flip-flop and put it on one person. But here he is the head of the man that wears that crown. And I know that the Prime Minister is ready for that. And I feel good. I feel good, Mr. Speaker, because I know if it is anybody I would like to care about me during this difficult time, it's a man who is the head of this whole team, that is a physician, and understand the terms in which it's going on. Mr. Speaker, that honorable gentleman has sat in and out of here with one plea. And what amazes me the most is how he balances what is being done. First of all, he's a physician where saving lives is number one. Number two, he is the gentleman that actually has control of this country when it comes to leadership. He is the Prime Minister. But most of all, he is a businessman. And from what I've seen thus far, I must say that he is doing one hell of a job, doing the job that he is doing and ensuring that our country stays safe from this pandemic so far. Mr. Speaker, we have had to turn around. Whether we want to face it or not, we are facing another surge. We have more deaths. Mr. Speaker, the first death recorded in this country was a lady that I was very close to, one that I admired. She took the necessary protocols, but unfortunately today, she is not with us. May her soul rest in peace. But for those who are here, let us not listen to what it is on social media about what the competent authority is doing this and whatever it is. Let us educate ourselves with the facts. Because this is not a time for us to play politics. This is a time for us to save lives. And I am on board with that 100%. That is what this resolution is all about today. Mr. Speaker, during the last 2 weeks, there was a lockdown that was put in place, implemented on this island of New Providence and Abaco. And sad to say the least, we've had an influx of people from New Providence into Andros. The numbers started to increase. We've had an influx now probably going on other islands. This is an increase of this going on to other islands. But I say to you, my people, in North Andros and the Berry Islands, that are listening to me right now, I don't care if it is your family member. The only way this virus would move and you would get this virus is if you don't stay still. If you allow your people to come into your household that are in a hot spot like New Providence or in Abaco, then you are chancing the life of your children and yourself. Please, please, these lockdowns can only work if you adhere to the protocol. Do not allow your family members to come into your home during lockdown and leave, because they would be spreading it. And those of you who are leaving the island to go there, don't if you love your loved ones. Don't do it. Everything is going to be all right if we just stay still. This virus can go if we don't move. So, with that being said, Mr. Speaker, I would like to also mention and remind my people to always adhere to the protocol. Don't care how you look at it, avoid mass gatherings. Stay physically distant from others. Wear your mask properly over your nose and your mouth when you go out. Well, I even wear mine at home because I don't even trust that. Wash and sanitize your hands regularly. Keep them away from your face. No matter how you look at it. It may sound like a recitation, like when you're in church and you have to say your little recitation, but it's always good to memorize it because it'll help you. And don't never forget, when you're interacting with people, it is better to do so outdoors and at the same time stay a distance away from them. This is all that is needed for us to put a fight against this COVID. Mr. Speaker, before I close, I would like to give my condolences to my family on the passing of my uncle, and to let them know that my thoughts and my prayers are with them. Also, Mr. Speaker, I would like to send a happy birthday shout out to my new dad, who is my oldest brother. And I want him to know that I love him. And I wish I was there to celebrate with him, but I would cut the cake over the phone, doing it by video call. Because I'm not going to be at any gatherings. And I know he knows better. So I'm going to lead by example. And I would do so, but let me just reiterate again, Mr. Speaker. It is important for us, no matter how you may hear from the side opposite, for us to work together during this time because the life we save could be ours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. God bless you and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of thank you very much, of the wonderful of West Grand Bahama and Bimini. Mr. Speaker, we are here today to debate on the resolution of extending the emergency orders. I wish to take this opportunity before giving my contribution, which will be very brief, Mr. Speaker, to take a moment of silence for one of my dear friends and a well-known patriot in the name of Mr. Rosny Cooper, who we would have lost just recently in the battle against COVID-19. Rosny was a staunch supporter of the Free National Movement, but that never stopped him from working with all divides, having significantly impacted his community for years, Mr. Speaker, in service, and even unto his death, Mr. Speaker, he went down fighting, wanting to do more for his community. I just take a quick moment of silence for Mr. Rosny Cooper. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this is not about gaining votes. This is about combating a virus. We are here, Mr. Speaker, as members of parliaments for various constituencies throughout this country, having been elected by a citizenry that entrusted us with their lives. Mr. Speaker, they did not elect us to fold in a crisis. They elected us, Mr. Speaker, to rise in this occasion. Occasions such as this, in which we are battling not only for the lives of our people, but that of our country, Mr. Speaker. The reality is the government cannot win this fight alone. We have said it over and over again. We have made appeals to every sector of this country to join us in this fight. And today, Mr. Speaker, we continue to do that, knowing that only together will we be able to combat this virus. This is a global pandemic. It is not isolated to the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. We are not the only country in the world that is going through this. We will not be the first, Mr. Speaker, to experience challenges, Mr. Speaker, because there are many other countries in the world who are experiencing similar. There is good in the fight. There is bad in the fight. But what we know, Mr. Speaker, is that there is a fight. Here at home, Mr. Speaker, we have done our endeavor best. Our endeavor best, Mr. Speaker, to rise to the occasion. This came upon us unexpectedly. There was not a plan in place, Mr. Speaker, to fight this pandemic. It was unknown. We had no idea it was coming. Like many storms of the past, Mr. Speaker, even our hurricanes that we would have experienced in recent time, and we were well warned and we prepared for it, we were still devastated. Mr. Speaker, the reality is, as we progress as a nation, we will have obstacles and hurdles that we will have to jump. We will have crises in which, Mr. Speaker, we have to deal with at a moment's notice. Mr. Speaker, we do not have the answers as to what tomorrow will bring. But Mr. Speaker, on the foundation of which we are established as a Christian nation, Mr. Speaker, my appeal to the Bahamian public, Mr. Speaker, is to have faith over fear. Faith, Mr. Speaker, that the moves and the measures that we are putting in place will benefit you in the end. Faith, Mr. Speaker, that at the end of the day, even though we may not be able to predict what tomorrow will bring, we are doing our endeavor best to mitigate significant impact. At some point, Mr. Speaker, everyone in this room will more than likely be impacted by COVID. Whether it is ourselves or a family member or a family friend, we will come in contact with someone who may actually develop this virus. Mr. Speaker, much has been said about a one-man band and a competent authority being one person. But the facts, Mr. Speaker, would indicate that this is not true. And PR, Mr. Speaker, which wish to minimize and diminish the impact of the competent authority in a time of crisis, Mr. Speaker, is not in the best interest of this country. No one, Mr. Speaker, is trying to do this alone. We can't. The competent authority, AKA cabinet, AKA experts, AKA medical practitioners. Mr. Speaker, this is a collective effort to save our country. I understand that in all that we do, political mischievousness in some regard may develop because we want the Bahamian citizenry to view us as having fight. But at a time like this, Mr. Speaker, I can only imagine if we were to combine our forces, whether we be opposition or the government, how quicker we will get to the reality of combating this virus. We're prolonging it. We're prolonging it, Mr. Speaker, with misinformation. We're prolonging it with PR tactics to put into the minds of our citizenry that this government is doing nothing. Mr. Speaker, in March of this year, we really went into what we call the first wave of this virus in our country up until July 14th. We're now into the month of October, and it's been quite some time. Many persons are at their wits' end with what they call the curfews and the lockdowns. Mr. Speaker, the numbers will indicate that even with the curfews and even with the lockdowns, we do have surges and spikes. But we were forewarned about this. We were told that this would still happen. We were prepared for this. We knew this. But here's the reality, Mr. Speaker. If we have these numbers when we enforce curfews and lockdowns, can you imagine what we will have without them? We don't look at the possibility of how horrific this may be if we didn't enact the measures that we are taking right now. Yes, indeed. Bimini, Mr. Speaker, and let me tell you something. My constituents of Bimini, over the years, and everyone knows, have been referred to, quote unquote, as unlawful. They've been made to be the bad guys of the Bahamas, the disobedient, the ones who don't listen. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? When we enacted that 2-week lockdown, as much as they would have had to say, they knew that in doing that and adhering to that protocol, they were saving lives. And today it is evident that that measure would have contributed to us spiraling out of control. I am so proud of those Biminites, Mr. Speaker. I am so proud. Fuss and fight, some of them may have. But when it came to saving lives and ensuring that their children were protected, each and every one of them remained in their homes. And for 2 weeks straight, 2 weeks straight, we stayed inside. We listened to authorities. We interacted with each other, whether it was through Zoom and Dr. Pamela Mills and the Christian Council in Bimini, all of those persons on the ground, they came together as a team. And I am so thankful for all of those persons on the ground in Bimini. And I say, God bless them for adhering to the protocols. Mr. Speaker, we can choose to be negative. We can choose to be positive. But there has to be a balance somewhere in between where we realize what is fact and what is fiction. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, that yes, we have nurses and doctors that get up every single morning risking their lives and that of their families to save lives. Yeah. But what are we doing as a citizenry? Rather than assisting them, we are making it more difficult for them. Right. When we don't follow the instructions that are being given by those very same people that we have to end up to if we were to develop this virus, what are we saying to them? We can speak about them being there on the front line and doing their best and not being recognized, but why don't we speak about the fact that we are contributing to their hustle and the fact that they are actually, Mr. Speaker, having restless nights, having to get up out of their beds, having to leave their families to save the life of someone that may not listen. Mm-hmm. Are we asking ourselves that? When we're going to parties without our masks, when we're gathering, Mr. Speaker, mass gatherings, where we're not listening to the authorities, are we speaking about that then? About the burden that we ourselves are putting on healthcare professionals? Or do we only see the burden later, even though we would have contributed, Mr. Speaker? I am thankful for those frontline workers, all of them. They're at the front of this, most vulnerable. Let us show them some respect, Mr. Speaker, by thinking of their families, by staying inside when we are advised to. I understand the statistics and I understand the reports, and I do know that it can be so hard, Mr. Speaker, mentally. You know, some of us may be stressed and some of us may be depressed, and we are not to undervalue that because this is a reality. This is a reality of lockdowns. It is worldwide. There are some persons who really do suffer from this. But here is what I suggest, Mr. Speaker. If we are incapable of staying on lockdowns or inside, then we tell somebody, we talk to someone, we say to those who are there to support us, this is really having an impact on me. How can I mitigate it? There are ways that we can do that. We can't go through this alone. We can't. So we need not be afraid to say that I have a serious issue, that I cannot remain in this position, but to just tell us, just tell the healthcare professionals, let us know who you are. But at the basis of all of this, Mr. Speaker, is one thing. We can't expect to combat this by just recklessly behaving. We can't. We can't expect for this to go if we were to not adhere to what is being told. We can't. How long will it take? We have no idea. None. We don't know when this will end. We don't know how many months this will be. But what we do know, Mr. Speaker, is that if we were to engage in all of the advice and the protocols that we would have been advised to have, then we would at least, Mr. Speaker, lessen the impact of COVID. Is it that hard? Is it that hard to simply, temporarily, just give a little piece of who we are to the fight of this entire pandemic? It's not too much to ask, you know. Businesses, Mr. Speaker, a downside of lockdowns. They may not necessarily be getting the monies that they would normally get when they are open, Mr. Speaker. But here's what I advise, Mr. Speaker. Let us learn for the moment to live in what we are facing by readjusting what we have to do temporarily, Mr. Speaker. So this is what I see for the future. Yes, we may be locked down on curfew right now. Yes, our freedom of movement may be temporarily, Mr. Speaker, lessened. Yes, we may not necessarily be able to travel, move about as much as we can because of this pandemic. But oh, Mr. Speaker, when this is over, the demand for services and industry and everything else that would have been on lockdown as a result, do you not think that the demand will increase? What does that mean? That means people will have to be in places to provide services. Let's look at the big picture. At the end of the day, temporarily, we are just now having to slow down. Think about the future. Take this time to prepare for what is to come. We're doing our best, Mr. Speaker, to help as best as we can. Nobody can say that this government isn't doing what it's supposed to do. When you have tests that would have started off in the 2000s, 3000s, and now we're up to 30-something thousand in less than 6-7 months, Mr. Speaker, that's not a failing government. That's a government that's acting. When you have contact traces, Mr. Speaker, would have started at 15, and now we have some 77 plus with the addition of more. Mr. Speaker, we're moving. The Bahamian people entrusted us to make decisions. Let us make them. That doesn't say that we don't hear what you're saying. All we're asking is for your trust. Your trust for us to help this country move in the direction we are to in the fight against this pandemic. That's it. What more can we do for our country, Mr. Speaker, at this time by simply giving of ourselves to a process that will benefit us in the long run? I can't say it any simpler than that. We have to have faith. We have to trust the process. We have to decide to look at what is positive. That's all. I know negative is there, but I bet you the positive will help us come through. Mr. Speaker, I am proud of what this government has done today. And I am proud of each and every one that has adhered to the protocols. West Grand Bahama and Bimini supports this resolution.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon, I rise on behalf of the people of the Great Golden Isles constituency. Mr. Speaker, I'm thankful to Almighty God, Yahweh Elohim. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak, to give representation. Mr. Speaker, as I was growing up on the island of Eleuthera, Mr. Speaker, it's in trying, challenging times like these, I'm mindful of a hymn they sang in the Anglican Church and other churches. It says, "O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, a shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Beneath the shadows of thy throne, thy saints have dwelt secure. Sufficient is thine arm alone, and our defense is sure." It is that God, Mr. Speaker, I come relying on and have confidence in that in spite of these challenging times, as I've heard some of the Baptist preachers saying, in the midst of the vicissitudes of life, we can stand secure in our faith, knowing that our God will keep us. Thomas Paine, the American revolutionary, said that during that time, says, truly these are the times that try the souls of men. I wish to echo those sentiments. The late Martin Luther King Jr., and I quote him often, said, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Before I go any further, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pause and to thank our frontline workers and professionals and employees. Some, Mr. Speaker, who we have lost in this battle. Mr. Speaker, some who I know are battling now for their lives in this battle. For doctors and nurses and hospital staff and EMS and police officers, and particularly those in this newly formed COVID-19 ambassadors, those on the front line. The rest of them, Mr. Speaker, I salute them and I thank them for laying their lives on the line to help and to keep a sense of security among us. Mr. Speaker, I know of families who have lost loved ones in this pandemic due to this COVID-19. I'm from Eleuthera, so, and I'm sure the member of Parliament for Central and South Eleuthera will speak to it in more detail. But a number of persons would have heard of the two elderly sisters. They were airlifted from Eleuthera together on an emergency flight. And they died days apart because of this COVID-19. This is vexing to me. This is painful. And I'd like to convey my condolences to those families. And that family had just laid to rest. One of the sisters, a couple of weeks before that, had just laid to rest her daughter, Mr. Speaker. And so, but while all the back and forth was going on, I was just saying, wow, I can only imagine if any of those family members were listening, the kind of impression they may have gotten as if we may have been belittling it. And I know we were not doing that. But I'm just saying if they were listening because of the moment, the pain that they were experiencing and what they're having to go through. Mr. Speaker, for our country, these are challenging times. Businesses are feeling this, particularly small businesses. Mr. Speaker, lockdowns and isolations have their consequences. As the member for North Africa alluded to earlier, human beings, we are social creatures. As human beings, we love to interact with family and friends and loved ones. And when we don't do it, it diminishes and it takes away from us, from who we are, the essence of who we are. It is said that a successful vaccine probably wouldn't emerge until about another 6 to 9 months, if then. These are challenging times. The poor among us are hit especially hard. The middle class can potentially be decimated as a result of what we're going through. This virus, then, Mr. Speaker, is not going anywhere soon. And so the question before us is, as we learn to live with this virus, are the emergency orders necessary? In listening to the presentations, one would get the impression that if these orders do not continue, it means that the curfews, it means that the lockdowns will not continue also. That's not true. That is not true. And I'll speak to that in a couple of minutes. But I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, while we're in this pandemic, that the establishment of, or the continuation of several educational platforms, I think, are mandatory. I think it is imperative that we continue teaching our people the best ways to interact with each other. We will limit our socialization, but as various members have been saying, publicly wear the mask. Practice social distancing. Wash your hands often. Avoid large gatherings. And we cannot stress it enough. Also, Mr. Speaker, we must broaden our base in terms of reaching out and teaching and educating our people with coping skills and survival skills. Mr. Speaker, just, I think 2 days ago, we lost a Bahamian to suicide. The pressure, the stress resulting from this pandemic is real. And I should like to extend my condolences to the persons connected, the families connected to that individual. It's not easy, Mr. Speaker. Lockdowns are not easy to endure. These curfews, 7 o'clock curfews, not easy. For me, personally, is one thing, but on a broad scale, collectively, it's extremely challenging, especially on Fridays. Fridays are ridiculous. Traffic jam, traffic congestion begins from noon, 11 a.m. to noon on Fridays. The streets are overpopulated. It's amazing. If it's going to continue, my suggestion would be, I don't think 7 o'clock Fridays it should be. I think move it back, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, give some more time. But Fridays are ridiculous in New Providence. Mr. Speaker, we must provide counseling for our people. In our constituency, we intend to have counselors in virtual sessions and for constituents to join in and ask their questions. Ask their questions and share whatever's on your mind. Get it off your mind. Speak to it. Ask your questions, give suggestions, whatever it is to help you to get through this. Also, Mr. Speaker, in terms of medical attention, and I'll get to that in a bit in terms of the testing, but Mr. Speaker, also, diseases, and COVID-19 is no different, thrives on weakened and compromised immune systems. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we must teach our people how to boost or how to strengthen their immune systems. We should have a government supplemental program for vitamin C, D3, zinc. and some other vitamins to help people boost their immune system. In our constituency, again, we intend to offer packets, monthly packets of vitamin C, of D3, of zinc, to help persons or constituents to boost, to strengthen their immune system, because the stronger your immune system is, the better your chances of surviving COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, we must continue to act, not just count and record the numbers of cases and count the deaths. It's more than a statistical exercise. Mr. Speaker, testing must be easy to access, and should be free. Last I knew, testing was an area of $200. $200 is a lot of money for people these days, Mr. Speaker. It's a whole lot of money. Again, I repeat, testing must be made available, must be easy to access, and it should be free. In addition to educating our people, Mr. Speaker, further, I think we need to look more within. Mr. Speaker, and there are issues concerning what I'm about to say. I grew up on the island of Eleuthero. I grew up in Greencastle, Eleuthero. I caught the ending part of the time, Mr. Speaker, of when the persons could not afford medical attention. It's extremely expensive, or the travel to Nassau back then, or the mode of transportation was different at the time. And Mr. Speaker, there's something we call bush medicine. Of course, they don't like to hear the term bush medicine today. So, Mr. Speaker, I like to refer to it as natural medicine or herbal medicine. Not in any way suggesting that this should take the place of prescribed medication. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that maybe a natural medicine grouping to review and to make recommendations regarding fever grass that's grown here, pine needle tea, shepherd needle, aloes, cerasee, soursop. Mr. Speaker, I buy soursop, but they call it graviola. They repackage it and call it graviola, but it's soursop. We grow it. There's something called blue vervain. Just heard about it recently. It's a bush that's grown wild, maybe a little shrub. And if you boil it, it has the effect that it can help to break up the odor from it, the aroma from it, can help to break up the mucus in your system, and it has helped persons to breathe more free. We need to look within ourselves individually and collectively. How can we help to come up with cures, with remedies locally? There are other countries that are doing it. Why can't we do it? Again, I am not in any way suggesting that it takes the place of prescribed medication. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it worked for me when I was growing up. It worked for me when I was having a bad case of the flu. It worked for me, aloes and cerasee and some lime in that. Knocked it out real quick. And also, Mr. Speaker, the ocean, the sea, Mr. Speaker, anytime I was coming down with the cold, a bad cold, or had the flu, all I had to do was go and dive and swim around near the ocean or in the sea, and it pulled all the mucus out of it. So the question should be, how can we manage our beaches? How can we manage it? How can we manage it effectively as opposed to just closing, shutting down, lockdown? You cannot go to the beach. One person during this rainy weekend was just laying in a puddle of water and said the Prime Minister should open the beach. So I guess that was his beach, but for the moment. But it's real, Mr. Speaker. And so, in my view, Mr. Speaker, I am of the opinion, and I agree. I was reading in a news article that says, in an attempt to absolve themselves of some of the responsibility, many Black leaders globally are placing the responsibility of spreading the virus on its citizenry, primarily because policies are failing. Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, what is needed is better leadership. Since we all agree that everything rises and falls based on leadership, this is no different. When things are going extremely well in a company, in an organization, we give the leader the kudos. But when things are not going well, we don't like to give them the kudos. But it's the principle is the same. Everything rises and falls on leadership. These are challenging times to lead. What our country needs, not only better leadership, in my opinion, but inspirational leadership and the positive reinforcement of what we are trying to achieve. The competent authority must challenge and inspire this nation. That's what leaders do. That's what good leaders do. That's what great leaders do. Inspire people to follow them. In this context, with regards to following in terms of the health protocols, how can we get out of this? What's going to help us the most and lead the nation through this? We can say as many times as we like that this is not about a one-man show, and it may not be. But the public perception is that it is. And perception, as we know, in most cases, to most people, is reality. So the issue today, in my opinion, the fundamental issue.
Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Golden
Mr. Speaker.
Gates on the point of order.
Yes, on the point of order. Again, misleading. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member has the right to say what his opinion is, but he does not have the right to say what the public's view is. He said what the public's view is. None of us know what the public's view is. No one. All of us have different views. Outside this chamber, there are people with all kinds of different types of views. But he's just saying that the public has a view, Mr. Speaker. And unless he can provide some evidence of the public's view, I think he ought to withdraw it, sir.
Mr. Speaker. In listening to the talk shows, Mr. Speaker, the people I communicate with, Mr. Speaker, the general public that I've been exposed to, Mr. Speaker, they are of the opinion that the competent authority is about one man. It may not be. I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying the public talk shows that I listen to, the persons that I have been communicating with, that's the opinion that they are of. And so I hope that clarifies it. Mr. Speaker, the fundamental issue, as I close, is it necessary for us to continue hijacking democracy and suspending our constitutional rights and privileges to manage this health crisis effectively? That's the fundamental issue, in my opinion. Discontinuing the emergency order does not mean that curfews and lockdowns and whatever else it provides will discontinue. It does not mean that. In my opinion, Mr. Speaker, the emergency order being extended is minimizing parliamentary involvement and oversight. Why should the parliament, the people's house, not be involved in the process more. It doesn't mean it cannot continue. What it simply means is come back to the people's house. So why we need emergency orders? No.
That's the legal mechanism.
I'm saying. Okay. Okay. So the orders are just, yes, it's a just in case clause. I understand. Okay, so the question is, and the question is, should we yield that authority for another month? Or should we say no? Whenever, let's come to the people's house and make that decision. That's what it comes down to. That's what it comes down to fundamentally. Okay? And so in case the public thinks if the emergency order does not continue, curfews and lockdowns will discontinue, that's not the case at all. It simply means we will have to come back to the people's house. That is why we were elected to be a part of the process, to give oversight, to be involved with the process. So the issue is, should we support the just in case something happens, or should we say, let's come back to the house and make that decision? Mr. Speaker, I understand the sensitivity. I understand the legitimate concerns. I fully understand. I understand the different thinking, the different reasonings and rationalization. I understand. But for me, Mr. Speaker, initially, I supported it wholeheartedly. I did. The last time, I did not support it. And this time, as I close, I again will not support it. Mr. Speaker, in closing, our Bahamian people, our people, are a people of great resolve. Our people are a resilient people. Mr. Speaker, I am an eternal optimistic person. I believe, as the late Robert Schuller said, tough times don't last, but tough people do. What we have endured, Mr. Speaker, as a people, and what we have come through to this point, Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt, by God's grace, by the good hands of a great God, we will endure this. I stand firmly on Isaiah 54:17, and I declare it over our nation. No weapons formed against us shall prosper. And I repeat it, no weapons formed against us shall prosper. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, a spirit of power, a spirit of a sound mind. So, Mr. Speaker, my faith, my hope, my confidence is in that God. That's where my faith is. That's where my hope is. And so, see, for me personally, it's different. I got a relationship with him. So my concern is not me. It's the people I represent. It's the Bahamian people at large. And I do not take that light, and I do not take it slight. I may be a bit passionate in how I present it. I respect opposing views. That's what this house is about. Share your view, present your view, deliberate on it. That's what it's about. And so, Mr. Speaker, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and his righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name, Mr. Speaker. On Christ, the solid rock, I stand. And on Christ, the solid rock, those of us in the Bahamas should stand. And all of the ground, Mr. Speaker, is sinking sand. And so, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for this opportunity. And may Almighty God continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and make the wealth common. Long live the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you. Golden Hours rest.
Thank you, honorable member. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Fort Charlotte.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of the hardworking, diligent, and God-fearing people of the place that I call home, the constituency of Fort Charlotte. I also rise giving thanks to God in whom I live, move, and have my being for another day on this side of Jordan. I ask, as I always do, that the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in His sight this day and forevermore, Mr. Speaker, and that my words are taken in the spirit in which they are intended by those who have ears to hear. As I begin, Mr. Speaker, I think it must be made clear at the onset, and I stand to be corrected, that we are not here to lend our support to or debate the continuation of curfews and lockdowns. To my understanding, this is not what we are here for today. I am under the impression that what we are here to discuss and support is whether to extend the orders that gives the government the right to make, vary, or remove provisions of the Emergency Order Act and regulation, if the need arises. In the midst of a national and global crisis like the one we are facing, where 1 minute this COVID virus seems to be managed and under control, and the next minute it's rampant and raging like a wildfire in a barren forest, the government of the Bahamas, in the interest of the public safety, should have this option, like all other global governments and leaders. According to last night's Wall Street Journal, Europe is experiencing a second wave that is forcing its countries to impose what they call social distancing rules to avoid returning to full-blown lockdowns. People in Paris, as well as Marseille, Lyon, Lille, Saint-Étienne, Rouen, Toulouse, Grenoble, Montpellier, will have to stay at home from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Only essential trips will be permitted. Only 6 people will be allowed to gather outside or inside private homes. Bars and restaurants had to close or have to close. Across France, gatherings are limited to 10 people, and wedding receptions, student parties, and other organized gatherings in hired locations are completely banned. Face coverings are compulsory in enclosed public spaces throughout France, while specific areas have introduced additional rules. And in Paris and surrounding areas, face coverings must be worn outdoors by anyone 11 years and over. In Spain, places of worship are restricted to a third of the normal attendance. Face masks have to be worn by anyone over the age of 6 on all forms of public transportation and in indoor public spaces across the country. Most regions in the country have made masks mandatory outdoors as well. In Germany, from the 20th of October, a district at the Bavarian-Austrian border will impose a circuit breaker or a temporary lockdown for 2 weeks. Schools, nurseries, restaurants will be closed, and people will have to stay home unless they have a compelling reason to leave. My Lord. Italy imposed the toughest restrictions on its population since ending its lockdown, Mr. Speaker, including the closure of all bars and restaurants at 6 p.m. In Spain, the government announced a state of emergency, giving national authorities greater powers to impose social distancing and emergency healthcare policies. All of these restrictions, Mr. Speaker, are new cycles of restrictions and were reenacted as these governments and leaders, and as the governments and leaders of Germany and France and Spain and Italy saw the need. Again, it is my impression that today's exercise would give the competent authority and the government of the Bahamas that same authority if the need arises in an attempt to stop our healthcare system from collapsing, to manage the growing death rate of our people, and restart a stalled economy by arresting the spread of COVID. As such, I support this resolution. But just to go a little further, Mr. Speaker, let me say it is not my intention to insult your intelligence like the leader of the opposition by boiling the whole hoopla down to something so simple, by saying that everything that we and the government are doing to the chagrin of their side and to the chagrin of many like-minded individuals, that what this is about is not an attempt to control people, sir, as much as it is an attempt to control the spread of the virus. That a virus that is hitching a ride throughout our society in the mouths and nasal passages and body cavities of a moving people. And one way to arrest the culprit is to stop people from moving and or getting so close to each other that there's a chance that the culprit can leap from one body to the next. Now, I'm no different from anyone else in the Bahamas. I don't like the idea of being locked down or on curfew or being given orders or dictates. Not being able to see my family or friends for fear that I may be a carrier and infect one of them or have one of them infect me. Having to sit in my house at a computer all day doing virtual meetings that now start before sunrise and last way beyond sunset almost every day. Or see my fellow Bahamians struggle to live a normal life. Why? Why would I want that? But at the same time, like I heard someone say in a passionate message that I got yesterday, how in the world did we get like this? It's a dangerous thing. It was all right when everyone was trying to get their composure and understand this virus. But 8 months in, Lord have mercy. There are some who see what is taking place 8 months in as an insult to the intellect, a parading of democracy and a sidelining of the right to move, a humiliation for owners and entrepreneurs. But Mr. Speaker, after 8 months, after everyone should have now gotten their composure and understand this virus, I too find it to be insulting, but in a different way. Now, I can't say it as passionately as the member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini did. But I'd like us to take a closer look at our situation. And borrowing from the words of Martin Luther King, and paraphrasing Martin Luther King in his letter from a Birmingham jail, I say, you deplore the measures that are taking place in New Providence and Abaco and some of our family islands, but your sentiments, my friends, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the underlying conditions that brought about these measures in the first place. I'm sure that none of us would want to rest content with the lazy, superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. And if we were to do that, perhaps we would find that our irritation is displaced or misdirected. You see, Mr. Speaker, this whole matter reminds me of a personal one that I have been dealing with ever since I returned to the Bahamas in 2006. See, whenever I'd go to do my annual physical, Mr. Speaker, the doctors would always tell me my pressure is high. And at one point, the doctor told me my pressure was so high that he wanted to put me on pressure pills right there and then. I never did it, Mr. Speaker, because this was the issue for me. I know that if I took the pill, they would bring my pressure down for the time being. But the minute I stopped, there's a great likelihood that my pressure would skyrocket again, because he or none of the other doctors I saw wanted to find a way, find out what was at the root of my pressure being high in the first place. See, Mr. Speaker, the pill for me was only a superficial fix that once removed, the problem comes again like a flood. I would have liked for the doctor to work with me to find out what was the root cause of my pressure being high. Tell me what the real problem was so that we could treat it together. I don't want the lazy, superficial kind of analysis that only sees a pill as a solution for the issue. I wanted the kind of careful, systematic, well thought through kind of analysis that grappled with the real underlying issue so that I did not need to take the nasty pill in the first place. You see, Mr. Speaker, I don't have an issue with consenting to extend the authority to give the competent authority in the government the option to impose vary or do away restrictions. But even if I deplore and protest against that measure, I must deplore just as much or even more the underlying cause that brought us here. Why must we have them in the first place? Well, the member from Bimini and West Grand Bahama sort of explained to us. And why must we be considering this some 8 months since the first case? Well, that's because at the heart of it, the virus is spreading now more than ever. 8 months after Bahamians should have gotten their composure and understanding of the virus. An understanding that the virus is relentless, that it is careless, it's a killer, and it's hitchhiking and joyriding around our country, using the Bahamian people as pawns to do its dirty work. You see, it understands our culture. It sees our behaviors as reckless, anticipates our willingness to disobey, takes pleasure in our apparent feeling of invincibility and apparent selfish nature not to care that we should be our brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers and cousins and mothers and fathers and friends keepers. This monster that we did not invite among us, but it came anyhow, sees us all as prime candidates and co-conspirators, and we have done nothing more than prove it right. It is moving among us and seemingly turning us into monsters along the way. So, if we are to make a case for continuing efforts to arrest this killer among us, it should be no different than when a mass murder is on the loose. You ask people to stay in the house and stay down until you could track it down. There's a killer on the loose. 132 dead, 102 hospitalized, a total of almost 6,500 cases that we know about, 6,390 more in 3 months than the whole 110 cases we had in the first 3 months. Why should we have to make a case? People are dying. Is that not a case enough? Or is it not enough people dying for this disease, from this disease, that it makes a case? How many more people have to die? When we lose more social giants like Dr. Judson Enos to this virus, is that not a case? Or is it just not a case because it's not one of your family members? What is the right number of people who have to be stricken with and dying from this disease to make a case? How many times do the authorities at the Princess Margaret Hospital have to say that they are now forced to choose who lives and who dies to make a case? When the competent authority and the government of the Bahamas are asking you to adhere to the order, it's not about you in particular, but it's about the virus. The virus has caused the worst crisis in our modern history, with extraordinary health and economic and social consequences. Some are exposed unknowingly, and by the time that they find out, they have exposed others. But there seems to be a good many who continue to bury their heads in the sand when it comes to the destructiveness of this virus and the need to stop it. So if we're going to make a case for continuing efforts to arrest this killer among us, I ask you to take a look at the condition of our healthcare system and the pressure that these hard-working healthcare professionals in our healthcare system are under, trying to keep up with the butchery that this virus is causing to the system because of the joyride that it's taking, hitched to those individuals who may be unwilling to recognize and or acknowledge its destructiveness, not just to the healthcare system, but also to our economy, our people, and our society. How much more horrific would it be if the government, like my member from West Grand Bahama and Bimini said, how much more horrific would it be if the government didn't have the protocols in place? So what if we, in the middle of this growing health crisis, do as some suggest and do not extend the emergency orders or measures because they, and particularly the lockdowns, as the leader of the opposition said, are useless tools? Then what? Well, then what we would be saying to the Bahamian people in this action is that we are giving you the autonomy. We put the well-being and recovery of our country into your hands. There's no need to fight for it. That we are trusting you to do the right thing. That the onus for the end of the spread of this virus is up to you. The opening of our economy, the return of our tourism industry to its strength, and the normalization of our way of life rests squarely on your shoulders. That when visitors come to our shores, we can hold them from the minute that they step off the plane onto our shores until the time that they return back to the plane to leave. We hold them to the same standards and practices that we ourselves have in place and are carrying out to ensure that we become and stay a proud COVID-free nation. I see everyone on TikTok, Mr. Speaker, doing all these challenges. And Bahamians are there on TikTok in droves too. If they want to do a TikTok challenge, let's challenge each other to rise up and become better citizens who do not need to be managed, ordered, or dictated to. That means that I should not have to go into a business establishment, and this is a personal experience, and get cussed out because I have to ask a customer to put her mask on over her mouth and nose when the store attendants or the business owner should have done it first. That's the responsible thing to do as a good citizen and a good business owner and employee, understanding the seriousness of our situation and knowing that you have the ability to do something about it without being told. That means that I or anyone else should not have to ask you, where's your mask whenever you show up at the door or come to the car window, because you understand that when you are interacting with me or them, there's a chance that you can either be opening yourself up to becoming a host for and carrier of this killer, or you could be transmitting it to me or someone else. That means that those of us who know better, like the saying says, should do better, point blank. As this experience is just as much an indictment of those individuals who are not doing better as it is of us who know better and are not requiring them to do better. This is how a democracy works, sir. What leads to dictatorship is when you turn your good thinking and your good actions over to a higher authority to think for you, to direct you, or to dictate to you. And so it means that if this exercise, once we do as people require, if this exercise, this experiment in autonomy does not arrest the spread of COVID in New Providence and throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, that we would not seek to find fault or blame anyone else but ourselves, because we were given the responsibility to exercise our own free will. The first thing, Bimini said it, about what they said about the people in Bimini, the first thing they say, but why try? They say you can't expect anything better from them. They say no matter what you do, they won't listen. They'll do what they want to do anyhow. They'll say they lack discipline, Bimini. So you're just wasting your time. That's just our culture. They say we are just our own worst enemy. Someday I wish truly that it was not so. That was not the way we have come to accept ourselves. It is one thing for others to believe that about us. It is worse. It's a worse thing when we know it about ourselves. But we could fix that. Because my life experience says we, the Bahamian people, are better than we or some people give us credit. And some people make us out to be. We must now start to show it. There are some who, when feelings of discontent about the situation we find ourselves in, and those feelings rise, use the words of Linden to incite their followers and listeners. They say, there comes a time when if you do not speak up for the country that God has given you, you don't deserve it. But I also wish to add and point out that at some point, Linden said, borrowing from John F. Kennedy, into your hands, more than mine, rests the success and failure of our course. This goes beyond speaking up for the country that God has given you. It's about showing up for the country that God has given you. There's a saying, action speaks louder than words. This is the time, Bahamas, that we need to show up for the country to say we deserve it. This government won't be distracted. This government believes in balancing public health policy making with the need to keep the economy going so that Bahamians could make a living. But it also saying that we can't fight this pandemic alone. The success or failure of our course depends on you. We are in this together. The actions and behaviors of the public and all citizens are also essential in fighting this pandemic. We are trying to save the country we love. We can't be afraid to speak to each other without it turning into a row if we see something wrong. We're trying to save the country we love. The bar owner should not have a crowd of people in the bar, unmasked, not socially distant, drinking and carrying on, like we are not trying to save the country we love. We're trying to save the country we love. The young people should not be flocking from this island to that island trying to escape isolation only to take the killer we are trying to arrest into the communities where it does not currently exist. We are trying to save the country we love, the country that you should love just as much as me. Let us use our best thinking for things to change, because no matter how you may feel, there is one thing that is certain. If we don't take action now, we will be heading into one of the worst periods of this pandemic when the fall and winter comes. I ask you to pay attention to what is happening around the world and prepare to suffer through it, or we can prepare to have a COVID-free winter. Simple as that. We can fix it. In many countries around the world, governments and opposition parties have agreed on restrictions and other measures to control the current spike in cases in their society. This is a responsible course of action. And despite what they say, controlled isolation does work. It worked in Bimini before. It worked in Grand Bahama before. It even worked in New Providence before we were able to keep when we were able to keep the case count to 104. Don't say it's a useless tool. It worked before when people adhered to the policies and requirements. But be that as it may, this is not the time to get in the business of name calling or blame shaming or trying to determine who believes in God or not. Especially as the last part suggests, we're setting ourselves up to be the great judge ourselves. And if we decide to sit as the great judge, this is what we should be saying to the people of God in the Christian land. If my people who are called by my name, one, would humble themselves, two, and pray, and three, seek my face, four, then turn from your wicked ways, then will we hear from heaven, and God will forgive our sins and heal our land. That's a simple solution to our problem. Understanding how God works throughout the land, those of us who can see with a supernatural eye the hands of God in our land and in our world should be telling the people, you cannot keep going down the middle, just praying and seeking God's face without humbling yourself and turning from your wicked ways. Those of us who are in touch with the kingdom and hear from the kingdom should be using our voice to say to the people under the sound of our voice what our spiritual eyes have seen. And the book of Deuteronomy says, if you do not carefully observe all the words of God's law that he has written in his book, that you may fear this glorious and awesome name, the Lord your God, then the Lord will bring upon you and your descendants extraordinary plagues and pandemics, great and prolonged plagues and pandemics, and serious and prolonged sickness. Moreover, he will bring back on you all the diseases of Egypt, of which you are afraid, and they shall cling to you until you are destroyed. This is what we should be saying to our people. Is you shall be left few in numbers, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. And it shall be that just as the Lord rejoiced over you to do you good and multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and bring you to nothing. For those of us who know better, because we can see the hands of God in it all, we must be willing to ask the masses, how much more talking must God have to talk to us? How many more times can we continue to take him for granted? How in the world did we get there? If I had to ask the question, that would be mine. But be that as it may, Mr. Speaker, if we who are called by his name are not preaching from the mountaintop what he says we need to do to heal our land, then at least we can tell those within the sound of our voice to carefully observe the man-made laws that simply says, wear masks properly over nose and mouth when out. Stay physically distant from others. Avoid mass gatherings. Wash and sanitize your hands regularly. Keep them away from your face. When interacting with people, do it outdoors at a distance with mask on. A mask, Mr. Speaker, according to the head of the CDC, Robert Redfield, may be more effective than vaccines. It's not that complicated, Mr. Speaker. There's not a magical solution. Outside of humbling ourselves, it's really just that simple, you know, Mr. Speaker. No big pie in the sky solution. Outside of humbling ourselves to crush the virus, just follow the science. So everyone you are not with, North Andros and the Berry Islands said, everyone you're not with 24 hours a day, mother, father, sister, brother, cousin, aunties, uncle, friends, see them as being positive. There's a killer that's snuck in among us, and it's holding us hostage. 8 months out of 8 months, after everyone was trying to get a composure and understand this virus, it's time for us to deal with it head on. We do not need more lockdowns. But Bahamians must be prepared for continued periods of tightening and loosening up if we do not stop the spread of this killer. We can fix it. Prove me right. Show up for the country you love. This, Mr. Speaker, is my case. And with that, I rest my case, lending my support to this resolution and thanking you and the Bahamian people for a listening ear.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Tall Pines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As usual, it's always an honor to stand in this place to represent the great people, the wonderful people, the resilient people of the great constituency of Tall Pines. And as I always say, Mr. Speaker, by extension, the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I am not one that gives a lot of spiritual quotes. And that's not because, members, that's not because I'm not a good church-going man. It's just because sometimes, Mr. Speaker, I leave that area to some others. But Mr. Speaker, I want to just remind the Bahamian people, and particularly my people of Tall Pines, some facts. But I think they are facts, Mr. Speaker. That emergency powers are a legal mechanism to deal with emergencies so that the government can act quickly to save lives. Speaker, let me remind the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker, because as I said, I'm not one for spiritual biblical quotes, but the COVID-19 pandemic has caused extraordinary health, economic, and social consequences for this great Commonwealth, and indeed, the world. Mr. Speaker, let me remind the Bahamian people that this pandemic is expected to last for several more months. Some might even argue for up to a year. Let me remind the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker, that this government cannot fight this pandemic alone. Let me also remind the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker, that we are heading into, as we move into the winter period, into the worst period that most likely could become the worst period during this crisis. But let me also remind the Bahamian people and the people of Tall Pines that notwithstanding all of these issues, your F&M government has taken the bull by its horn. That we have stood up And we will continue to stand up for every member of Tall Pines, every member of North and South and Luther, every member of West End and West Grand Bahama and Bimini and North and South Andros, Michael, because we are going to do what it takes, Mr. Speaker, to defend this pandemic. We're going to do what it takes, Mr. Speaker, to save lives in this great Commonwealth. And so, Mr. Speaker, when I hear the PLP speaks about where we are, when I hear the PLP, Mr. Speaker, speak about what this government should do and what they aren't doing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I hear the PLP government, the leader presents a 10-point plan. I think he got about 7. But Mr. Speaker, when I listened, I was listening for some revolutionary plan or something that we haven't already done or started. Mr. Speaker, it's the regurgitation of what we are doing. And the only difference, Mr. Speaker, is that we're doing it better. Speaker, I remind the Bahamian people to put your faith, Cat Island, in the team that laid pipe in Cat Island. Exuma, Ragged Island, put your faith in the team that caused the economic revolution to begin again in the Exumas. North Andros and the Berry Islands, put your faith in a team that's built bridges and paved all the streets almost in North Grand Bahama. And South Andros. West End and Bimini, put your faith again in the government that's and Grand Bahama that stood up for you and made bold decisions to revolutionize and cause your economy to start bouncing again. I put it to you, Bahamas, Tall Pines, put your faith in this F&M government, put your faith in this competent authority. Mr. Speaker, and because I realize that this opposition is missing the point and the seriousness of what's going on, I pray, as my learned friend Fred Smith said, I pray, please, do not let the PLP win this government before this pandemic is finished, because more Bahamians will die. Please, Lord. They seem to be missing the point. Please. More nurses will get sick. Please. More teachers will get sick. More of our people would not be able to go to our hospitals and health facilities because, obviously, they are missing the point. Speaker, please, through you, I want our Bahamian people to understand that this government, this competent authority, all of us in this parliament, we don't like lockdowns. We don't like our economy being stifled. We want our children in their classrooms with their teachers. We want our nurses and doctors focusing on heart diseases, persons getting serious accidents and dealing with those issues. We want our members of parliament in parliament doing what we were doing before this pandemic, before the hurricane, and changing the way our economy was moving. We want us to come back on that focus. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to say to the PLP, please, look at the facts. Please, work with us. This is what the Bahamian people expect of a responsible opposition in these crucial times. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have done our best. We have shown the Bahamian people that we understand that during these crises, the most vulnerable will be those in our inner cities, those who don't make the kind of money we make, those of us who can't fly to the United States if they get sick, that don't have family and friends and money to go into the United States and Europe. We understand that, Mr. Speaker, and this is why this competent authority, this government, this F&M government, who the people of Tall Pines put their faith in when the PLP abandoned them, when the place was on fire, they put our faith in us and we delivered a landfill. And I'm saying that we're going to deliver a healthier Bahamas. We're going to deliver a more prosperous Bahamas. And so, Mr. Speaker, because we know that our people needs us, that's why we pumped millions and millions of dollars in NIB and giving persons hope, even when in normal circumstances they may not have qualified. They may have not have qualified for the help from NIB, but we decided as a government to do what is best to help our people. This is why, Mr. Speaker, we as a government decided that we know that our people are out of work. And so social services extended more and more millions and millions of dollars. Notwithstanding the financial problems we found ourselves in, but we wanted to touch lives. We wanted the Bahamian people to know that we are in this together. And as usual, the FNM always delivers. And so we're going to deliver for every Bahamian, whether you're in Grand Bahama and Abaco or whether you're in Mycal. Because I know, Mr. Speaker, we have delivered for Torrey Pines, we have delivered for New Providence, for our inner cities, and we take this COVID-19 pandemic very, very serious. And so, the resolution before us, Mr. Speaker, doesn't really, to me, I think it's a straightforward issue. Are we out of the woods? No. Are things getting any better in terms of the numbers? The reality is, no. Are we going to face more challenging times as the winter comes in before us? Yes. So what do we do, Mr. Speaker? We throw our hands down, Mr. Speaker. Not this government, not this FNM team. We don't throw our hands down. We prepare ourselves to lead our people. We do what it takes to propel them forward and to help them survive because we know the pain they are suffering. Because we too, notwithstanding the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we are in this house, we too, we live in our societies. They are our sisters and brothers. They are mothers and fathers. And they are even our pastors, no matter what they say, they're even our pastors. They are our teachers. And so we're in this together. And so, Mr. Speaker, it speaks to leadership. I think this whole issue about the competent authority speaks to leadership. And as I said in my last presentation, leadership requires exceptional decision-making skills. And I've seen in this competent authority, Mr. Speaker, in this executive team, this government, the ability to make the right decisions. And it calls for making decisions, Mr. Speaker, in times of high pressure, complex circumstances and opportunities. But I think we have it within our team to do just that, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, we in the FNM, we have demonstrated over and over again that we are committed not only to economic reform and strengthening our country from an economic perspective, but, they talk about democracy. We have been a party that always been the party that strengthened democracy in our country, that fought for greater democracy. It was us, Mr. Speaker, that said we're going to open the airwaves so Bahamians could go online or go on the radio stations and TV stations and even criticize us. It was us who said that we wanted our local government to be expanded and developed further in our family islands. And it is still our intent, Mr. Speaker, to bring it to New Providence. It was us who strive, who supports democracy at levels that the PLP should even be ashamed to bring up the word democracy in the modern Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. But I get the point. I know there was a point raised by the member for Golden Gates and between he and the member for Cat Island and Rumkey speaking about parliamentary oversight and quality of oversight. Mr. Speaker, I've always been, if there's been any member in this House who has spoken about the necessity for parliamentary oversight, the necessity for quality oversight has been me, Speaker. And I will continue to do so. And so I do understand and I do support the view that our Parliament must have more oversight. But I want to say this, Mr. Speaker, the fact that we are here today and we've been coming on a constant basis to speak to these resolutions, to be able to, through us in this Parliament, to authorize or to pass a resolution giving the competent authority the constitutional and legal capacity or rights to do what he does and his team does, is evidence that we are in a democracy. Evidence that we are all about reporting and making sure that our executive, during this time when when this team has these extraordinary powers, that they are held accountable. Because every month, Mr. Speaker, I, as a member of Parliament, Golden Gates, North Islanders in the Barry Islands, West End and Bimini, they have an opportunity to speak their minds, to share their ideas. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, and I'm one of those people, I say some things that I sure the executive ain't too happy about. And there are going to be many times that it's going to continue. I'm not here, Mr. Speaker, to praise and appease the executive. I'm here, Mr. Speaker, to provide that parliamentary oversight. to provide that challenge to the government to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And Mr. Speaker, this is what we're doing here right now. We're saying to the competent authority, we understand the issues that are going on in our country. We're discussing it, each and every one of us, putting it to the Bahamian people, talking about what we're doing and what we plan to do in the future, and saying to them that, hey, given all of that, we think that we do still need to extend these powers. And so that's democracy at work. And yes, maybe, Mr. Speaker, as I said last week, maybe after all is done and all is well, we may have to, and I do still recommend that maybe a special select committee be formed that we can look at what happened and what could be done in the future. But these are things that I'm sure we would come to when the time is right. Mr. Speaker, there was some talks about Barbados. You know, I went to university in Barbados, University of the West Indies, and I know Barbados. Barbados, and I know we compare Barbados because we know the Prime Minister, for example, instituted a COVID-19 czar. They talked with their stakeholders. They opened a military hospital. I call it the Paragon-based hospital that deals specifically with. But Mr. Speaker, Barbados is one island. We are an archipelago. We have much greater population than Barbados. Circumstances are different. We have a greater mass of international persons coming into the Bahamas. We're close to the United States. There are different factors, Mr. Speaker. But if you look at it pound for pound, Mr. Speaker, I would submit, pound for pound, this government, this competent authority has done a wonderful job. And I have the greatest confidence in he and his team. Speaker, I realize that our civil servants, our teachers, our police officers, and all those in the front line, they're challenged. They put themselves in high risk. But I could guarantee them, I could tell them that we who sit in this parliament, we always think about them. We're appreciative of the work that they do. And when we come here and we speak with their health, their safety in mind. We make decisions with their health and their safety and their families in mind. And so just like other countries, several members spoke to those countries who are experiencing some of the same issues we have with increased numbers, and the fact that they have also made moves to bring in additional restrictions. That all of us in the world, not only in this Caribbean region, but in the world, we're experiencing similar issues. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I said, please, Lord, please, while this pandemic is among us, please, hearing and listening to the submissions from the opposition, please, listening to what their plans are and what their views are, please, don't do it to us. Don't do it to us. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to end by reminding my colleagues, particularly the few members who are here, of the importance of us as a parliament reviewing at some stage, Mr. Speaker, reviewing at some stage the necessity, I would argue, of us to pass and present to this House a resolution, Mr. Speaker. I think it's time. A resolution. I've been a part of a team that has already looked at a resolution, Mr. Speaker. We've already looked at a resolution that speaks to how we manage and work in this parliament during this period. Mr. Speaker, because, and if I may, and I'm sure the competent authority and executive members will be addressing this, and I pray that they also look at it, Mr. Speaker. And the one that we've looked at starts off because we have the power within ourselves. And I'm just going to read the first paragraph and the penultimate paragraph, Mr. Speaker. This is a draft resolution. Whereas Article 51(1) empowers each house of the Bahamas Parliament to regulate its own procedures. And be it resolved that any member attending and sitting virtually be deemed present and eligible to fully participate in the proceedings as if the member was physically present in chambers. And be it further resolved that all hybrid arrangements for the sitting of this House be agreed as is set out by resolution of this House. Speaker, I think it's high time, Mr. Speaker, that we take and we look at this resolution so that the challenges that our executive, the cabinet is facing, that we don't face those challenges here. I think it's high time countries throughout the region has done it. I think it's high time to protect ourselves and our families in this parliament, that we revisit quickly, if not the resolution that has already been presented, that the government would look at a resolution so that our members who from the family islands particularly, and those who may not wish to come here every week, we could still operate as a parliament in safe areas and by other means, hybrid means. Speaker, I know that these are challenging times in our country. But one other thing I know, that our government is up to the challenge. I know that they've worked hard in the past, and I know, Mr. Speaker, they're working hard today. And after we pass this resolution, after Tall Pines supports this resolution, I know that they will work even harder tomorrow. And for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, for those reasons, Tall Pines supports the resolution to extend the powers of the competent authority as presented in the resolution before the House this evening. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me thank the honorable member from Michael for allowing me to use her hand sanitizer. Mr. Speaker, I stand here by the grace of God and through the support of the wonderful people of Elizabeth. We have been working diligently throughout the pandemic, and I am pleased to say that with the support of a wonderful executive, we have managed to give out some 14,000 bags of groceries. And I have made the commitment to make contributions up to the extent of my parliamentary salary to contribute to that initiative. But Mr. Speaker, today we are here to debate the extension of the emergency orders. And unlike the overwhelming majority of the government, Elizabeth will not be supporting this extension. I'd like to give some clarity to the basis of this decision. This morning when I woke up, I looked on the Johns Hopkins and the World Meter website to see that there have been some 43.5 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the world. When I checked this afternoon, it was up to 43.7 million. 1.2 million deaths almost so far. And when you look, Mr. Speaker, at the performance of the various 215 countries, jurisdictions, or precincts in the world, there's a difference in performance. I am minded of the fact that we are now 20 years after that incredible day in September, 20 years ago. After, not all of them were in the final race, but there was one young lady named Eldis that got a team into the final. It was started off by Sabathita Fines. All of us can remember Chandra running the backstretch, giving the baton to Pauline, and Debbie bringing it home. How is that relevant, Mr. Speaker? It's relevant because a tiny little country, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, was able to be at the top of the world. I move now to another parable, one of my favorites. You can find it in Matthew 25, or you can find it in Luke 19. It's the parable of the talents. And it speaks a story of a master who gives 5 talents to one servant, 2 talents to another, and 1 to a third. And he goes away on a journey and he comes back. The one to whom 5 had been given had invested it, got 5 more talents. The one who had 2 got 2 more. The one who got 1 had buried it in the ground and was only able to produce 1 talent. And the Lord addressed the two who had done well and described them as good and faithful servants. So, Mr. Speaker, how does that have anything at all to do with COVID? If we look around the world at the total number of cases, you can imagine that there are some countries that have 1 billion people, some that have a couple 100 million, and some like the Bahamas that have 390,000. And so we ought to reference everything by cases per million. And the average number of cases per million around the world is 5,576 cases of confirmed COVID in countries around the world. 5,576. I'd like people to write that down. The number of deaths from COVID, 149 deaths. Now, remember the Bahamas' performance at Sydney and in Atlanta, besting the world. And let's look at how the country, the United States of America, which has far more deaths than most countries. Well, let's look at the region. Jamaica, 2,950 cases per million, 65 deaths per million. Trinidad and Tobago, 3,934 cases per million, 75 deaths per million. Barbados, 790 cases per million, 24 deaths per million. Bermuda, 3,054, 145 deaths. Now, what about the Bahamas? The world average, 5,576, deaths, 149. The Bahamas has 16,251 cases per million. Let me read Jamaica, 2,950. Trinidad, 3,934. Barbados, 790. The Bahamas, 16,251. When we look at deaths, 335 deaths per million. The world average, 149. Barbados, 24. So, Mr. Speaker, there's a saying in Latin. I didn't do Latin GCE. I stopped after BJC. And there's some lawyers here that would know what res ipsa loquitur means. The thing speaks for itself. You see, Mr. Speaker, if we look at the causes of death in the Bahamas, 2009, 2019. Number 1, ischemic heart disease. Number 2, stroke. Number 3, hypertension. Number 4, HIV/AIDS. HIV/AIDS went down to number 5 in 2019. About 5.5 deaths per thousand typically occur in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And we used to say that communicable diseases have been supplanted by non-communicable diseases. Well, Mr. Speaker, from July the 14th, 2020 until now, we have had roughly 120 deaths. There are about 14 deaths that are not yet classified, which means that at this clip, communicable diseases will eclipse non-communicable diseases as a leading cause of death in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. You see, Mr. Speaker, the challenge that we have in the Bahamas, how did we deal with the talents that were given to us? And I use the word talent metaphorically. What did you know? When did you know it? What did you do afterwards? And so as we stand here today to debate whether or not we should extend these emergency orders, I would say respectfully that the process that we have engaged in over the last 6 to 8 months have not worked. They have not worked, Mr. Speaker. We are underperforming as a nation. We are underperforming relative to all of our peers in the region. And as it relates to cases, 80% of the rest of the world. And as it relates to death, 89% of the rest of the world. And that does not include deaths that occurred today, deaths that occurred yesterday. You see, Mr. Speaker, I spend a lot of time taking care of COVID patients. It is a privilege. On Saturday, I operated on 3. Tomorrow, I will operate on 2. It is something that is my duty as a physician. And so when I speak about some of the challenges, it is not to lambaste. It is not to denigrate. It is because if you look at the 7 habits of highly effective people, the 5th habit of highly effective people is to seek first to understand, then to be understood. We need to be talking to each other, listening to each other, not shouting and rowing and screaming at each other, because the lives of the people of this country is at stake. The economy of this country is at stake. So we don't need to be bickering and shouting and talking about F&M and PLP and DNA and so on and so forth. We need to be working together to solve this problem. I work with some incredibly dedicated people, Mr. Speaker. They work their tail off. They go in a corner and they cry. And they get back up and they go at it again. Some of them have lost their life. Some of them have been infected. Some of them feel as if we don't care about them. And so when comments are made about the challenges in the healthcare system, it is not to do anything other than to speak the truth. We have challenges with people accessing health care services. Right now, we have challenges with people getting access to ventilators, challenges getting access to the operating room. Every single person that goes into the hospital should be tested. That does not happen now, Mr. Speaker, not in the public sector. Every single person should be tested. When we look at testing, and yes, with the assistance of the public sector, the private sector, and the hard work of the National Reference Lab, we have definitely increased our testing. We did 279 tests the other day. 19% of them were positive. That means we're not testing enough. The positivity rate of 19% means you are not testing enough. It's only when, if you look at the World Health Organization data and recommendations, when you get 5% consistently over 2 weeks, that you can say with certainty that you are testing enough. And if you are testing and you have a positivity rate of 5% or less, and your number of positives is not going up, only then can you say that your pandemic is under control. And so what is the message to the people of this country, Mr. Speaker? The message is, assume that every single person that you come into contact with is COVID positive. Every single person that you come into contact with, assume that they are COVID positive and act likewise. You see, Mr. Speaker, what we ought to be doing right now is to build a modular COVID facility at a place outside of Princess Margaret Hospital, a place outside of Doctors Hospital, so that we can concentrate the care. How many beds? I don't know, maybe 150 beds. We can ask Direct Relief, we can ask some of the other NGOs to assist us in building a modular facility that's robust, where we can have an intensive care unit, operating rooms, so that we can reduce the splitting of care. We now provide care at South Beach, at Doctors West, at Doctors East, at Princess Margaret Hospital. And what does that do? It means that the hospital is stretched. It means that the staff is stretched. It means that, Mr. Speaker, ordinary people coming in with heart attacks and strokes and diabetes and kidney failure cannot get care. That is happening in this country today. And so if you ask me, how many tests do we need to be doing in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas today? 1,000 tests per day. 1,000 tests per day. Can we do RT-PCR on 1,000 people? I don't think so. But if we embrace antigen testing and couple that with RT-PCR, we can test. And if we look at the model of Eldis, Salvatita, Chandra, Pauline, and Debbie, the Bahamas can become the thought leader in the management of COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, we are underperforming right now. Now, it is said that you should never, ever, ever give criticism without offering solutions. And so I'm going to read my 12 recommendations, and then I'm going to sit down. 1, we should publish the plan and educate the public, and do so as quickly as possible. 2, if we are going to lock down, let us do it well. Let us do it right. This on or halfway is not making sense. What it is doing, in my view, is harming businesses. It is forcing people to jam up in front of the food store, in front of the pharmacy, etc., because now they're desperate to go and get their goods and services. We should be testing, as I said, so that we get to a 5% or less positivity rate. 4, we need to bring back participatory government. Most of the cabinet is not here. Why? Because they were exposed to COVID and they are now in quarantine. We should long have stopped meeting in that place, and we should long have stopped meeting in this place, Mr. Speaker. We should be meeting, as the Deputy Speaker, the Honorable Member for Tall Pines said, virtually, or in a different environment where we can be properly socially distanced. It is time to end the role of the competent authority. I've said it before, I will say it again. Because the competent authority, by definition, is an affront to participatory democracy. I don't believe I need to go any further than that. It is time to allow organized, safe access to essential items. I've said that already. We talked about the field hospital. We need to support the ability to exercise. Mr. Speaker, I've talked about non-communicable diseases being supplanted by communicable diseases. However, people that have non-communicable diseases are more likely to catch COVID and to die from COVID. And while the data would suggest that gyms are a place where you are more likely to get COVID, we have arbitrarily, and some might say capriciously, decided that we are going to shut down gyms and exercise places. And I believe that is to the detriment of the public. We should support access to drugs like remdesivir. But, as the Honorable Member from Tall Pines, I believe, and also Golden Isle said, wouldn't it be amazing if we looked right in our neighborhood, Sarah C., Beige Arena, Fever Grass? Could it be that right in front of our eyes, the cure or the treatment for COVID might exist? Let us embrace our own natural products. Let us subject it to rigorous scrutiny. Copyright it, patent it, so that make sure it don't get teeth by the rest of the world. We also need to work on food security. Flotillas need to be going out for scale fish, lobster, and all other products from the sea. And we should be engaging North Andros. All of the through you, Mr. Speaker, all of the expertise from BAMSI and in Long Island and elsewhere to be able to feed our people. Mr. Speaker, this thing is not going anywhere. It is not going anywhere. And we need to understand that the world ain't checking for us. We got to check for ourselves. I think we should eliminate the ban on mask importation. It has served its purpose. And people sometimes want to get access to better quality masks so that they can protect themselves and their family. I think that people should have liberal access to high quality masks. And so, Mr. Speaker, I end by hoping that my brothers and sisters in here understand that this presentation was given on the basis of Ephesians 4:15, to speak truth in love. Elizabeth will not support the extension, but Elizabeth supports the government of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many.
As many, the chair recognizes the good member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the leader of the opposition will beat the curfew. He looks in good shape. He's nice and trim. So Mr. Speaker, I rise with the grace and blessings of the Almighty, who is the author and the finisher of my faith. And I also rise on behalf of the good and resilient people of the Fox Hill constituency. My condolences and my heart go out to the families in Fox Hill who have lost mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, children, and friends during this time, whether it's through the pandemic or through other causes. We cannot hug you like we used to. We cannot sit with you and reminisce with you as long as we used to. Not in these times. It is hard. It is painful. And we all suffer this pain together. We will sustain each other and we will see each other through this, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Fox Hill constituents and Bahamians in general, I know that you are tired. I know you are weary. And I know you ache. We all ache. We are in this boat together. Some of us at different parts of the boat, and others, a little better, a little worse, but we're all in the same boat, and we have to all do our parts to get through the storm. I love you. I am with you. We will get through this together. Most of you are compliant. Fox Hill, I drive through. I see the empty parks. I see the empty streets. So I know that most of you, most of us are compliant with the protocol. So together, we will make it our business and our bounden duty to cause our non-compliant brothers and sisters to be more compliant. And know that community means that we are only as strong as our weakest link. And so I support this resolution to extend the emergency orders to the 30th of November, 2020. I do so not because I want to. I do so not because I want to. I do so because I must. I must do so for our safety, for our very lives, and for a quick return to a semblance of the life we all once knew. It is my hope and it is my prayer that we would have broken the back of what Fort Charlotte called this killer, this pandemic, and there would be no cause for another extension after November. Like Elizabeth, we have given out thousands of bags of groceries, coupons, and up to Sunday, yesterday, we gave out fresh vegetables to go with the national grocery bags for the elderly and other vulnerable residents. Could we cover everyone? No. Did we want to cover everyone? Absolutely. Mr. Deputy Speaker, again, I support this extension of the resolution of the emergency powers, not because I want to, but because I must. Foxville has a high percentage of elderly persons. We have many people in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s, a few over 100, and at least one at 106. It is for them that I support the extension of this emergency powers. They are our precious pearls. I have read where we are losing them at a rate where we are somehow losing some of what makes us us because it resides in them. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to say how useful and helpful the churches and others in the community of Foxville have been. Churches like Mount Carey Baptist Church, St. Paul, St. Anselm's. But most of all, I want to single out the Church of God on Burnett Road, because that is the arm that deals with the national feeding program. Reverend Daniel Hall is probably the youngest senior pastor in Foxville, and he puts his heart and his soul into his work. He has medical issues in his own house, but still he is out there. So therefore, Foxvillians, Bahamians, we must be compliant for people like him. We must be compliant for people like my niece, who is a doctor at Princess Margaret Hospital. We must be compliant for all of the health workers who also have families, who also have aspirations, who also want to walk their daughter down the aisle, who also want to see their children graduate from university. So we must be compliant for them. Let's take this one seriously. Let's take this one that when it is all over, we remain compliant and thus remove the reason for extension. We can do it. So to the doctors, Shalia, and all of your colleagues, to the people who come every day around the Bahamas to remove our refuse, our garbage, I say thank you. We have to be compliant for you. For the grocery store cashiers, for the stock people, for the people in the stores from Monday to Friday, we have to be compliant for you. What we bring into your store, you take home to your family. So we want to be compliant with you. I have heard stories, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've heard the stories of constituents who have been in quarantine in a medical facility. They tell me of the screams of people in pain. They tell me of early morning arrival of a hearse to carry out those who didn't make it through the night. This is real. It's not going away anytime soon. And so our management will make a difference. Have we done everything as well as we could? Probably not. Can we do better? Definitely. But, you know, something that when something is happening, sometimes you have to pause to be able to gather and say, well, maybe this wasn't exactly as we wanted. That wasn't exactly as we wanted. We're going to pause for a month and we will get it the way it needs to be to move our country forward. Mr. Speaker, we seem to ignore what goes on around the world. But I have heard my colleagues speak about places around the world, and it seems to be far away. It seems to be something out of a movie or something we hear about. But we are actually living it right here. Some lockdowns, and it's not a lockdown or a curfew, are even more stringent than ours. Can we extend the curfew to a later hour? Certainly we can. But once that is done, will we then, if it's 10 o'clock, decide at 9 o'clock we're going to rush to the grocery store? Are we going to decide at 9:30 we're going to rush to the laundry mat? So we have to think, how do we do this? Not just for ourselves, but for each other. I don't like it any more than anybody else. I remember as a little girl, I've heard Elizabeth and Fort Charlotte and Golden Isles talk about our natural medicines. I know Sorosy. I didn't like Sorosy. They had to run me down, hold my nose, and pour it down my mouth. Was I better afterwards?
Are you misleading the house? You said they had to run you down? That was a tough job. Carry on.
I have some big, strong cousins. But, and some of them didn't make it to the national stage. Even my brother beat me one day, but we won't talk about that, you know? But the thing is, sometimes what's good for us doesn't always taste good, doesn't always feel good. But we have to take it because it does us good. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to talk long. I just want to say that I am supporting this extension because I must, for the safety, the health, and the lives of our constituents in Foxville and throughout the Bahamas. And you know what's made it a little bit more difficult? We've had this heavy rain to contend with. It's rained and we talk about pine, wood, and the flooding. But people forget that Foxville has some very low-lying areas. I have been on the road dealing with flooding from last week Sunday. So you're thinking you can't go anywhere. You've got a pump, and the pump has run out of gas because, you know, you didn't think it was going to last that long, so you can't pump anymore. And the water is just this much from your house. In regular times, you would go out and do something. But now unless you get permission, you have to live with it. And so this makes it even more difficult for us. We have some new beautiful roads, and they were like lakes over the past weekend. Going to church, people were pushing some cars out of water. So this makes it even difficult. I don't have a difficulty with the 12 points that Elizabeth raises or offered. Yeah, we can do some of those things. Some of the things that Fort Charlotte offered, we can do those things. What West End and Bimini, well, that's West End, isn't it? West Grand Bahama and Bimini offered, they are all ideas. And I speak up for Foxville, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I don't wait for someone to say this is what we're going to do. I speak up for Foxville. Now, it mightn't go my way, but I speak up for Foxville. And no one man band, no one person is going to say X, Y, Z without me saying QRST. Mr. Speaker, it has been alluded in here today that we are just following without thinking, voting without thinking. I am voting for this extension because I must, for the safety and the lives and the health of the constituents of the Fox Hill constituency. I will support every measure that will make life easier for us. Mr. Speaker, when I leave here tonight and I go back to Fox Hill, if I live among my constituents, I will live what they live. I will feel what they feel. And I will do what I can, as long as I can, to make sure that we come out of this together. I will agitate for Fox Hill and, by extension, the Bahamas. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, and with my heartfelt, I don't even know how to say it, right? Fox Hill, we are in this boat together. We're going to row to safety. We'll be stronger. We'll be better. And we will survive it. So let's remember to keep washing our hands, wear our masks, and keep our social distance. We will be together for Fox Hill Day in 2021. I speak it here. I speak it now. As they say, I decree and I declare that we will be together on the Fox Hill Parade and Freedom Park in 2021 because we will defeat this killer and we will learn to exist with it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. God bless Fox Hill. God bless Commonwealth of Bahamas.
Thank you very much, Fox Hill. As many. The chair now recognizes the member for Central and South Eleuthera.
Deputy Speaker, Psalms 46, verse 1 says, and I quote, God is our refuge and strength, a very pleasant help in trouble. I would like once again to thank the Almighty God and the strong and wonderful people of Southern Central Eleuthera for affording me this privilege of representing them in this honorable house. Mr. Speaker, I will note that the first wave of this awful pandemic brought on as a result of COVID-19 started around the 15th of March, 2020. That was when the Bahamas reported its first COVID-19 case. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that the mortality rate for the first wave was 10.6%. At that time, the Ministry of Health conducted some 2,555 tests during the first wave of the coronavirus. The positive rate of the virus spread during the first wave was commendable. Whenever there is a positive rate of less than 5%, the spread of the COVID-19 appeared to be moving in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, during the first wave of the pandemic, you would note that Eleuthera in particular, Southern Central had no reported cases. Mr. Speaker, the medical team of Southern Central Eleuthera, upon being informed of the COVID-19 and the landing of the virus within the Bahamas, the medical personnel of Southern Central, as well as officials of the Ministry of Health in Nassau, immediately kicked in, geared in, and preparing South and Central Eleuthera constituency for what we hope would never have happened with the virus landing on our shores. The administrators, the medical professionals, and the Ministry of Health officials, along with myself, arranged for properties to be deep cleaned, mainly two facilities, one on Cupid's Key, which is our quarantine center, and the other at Workers House in Governor's Harbor, Queens Highway, which is an isolation center at the Workers House. And also, Mr. Speaker, We also have a center in the Hatchery Bay Clinic. Mr. Speaker, please, I want the residents of South and Central Eleuthera to know that never once did your member of parliament or the medical personnel on the island take slightly the threat of this deadly virus. Recognizing the horror and the deadly sting of the coronavirus, I immediately started my search to resource medical supplies for the protection of the residents of South and Central Eleuthera in particular. I was able to locate and purchase a total of 20,000 reusable and disposable masks that were distributed throughout my constituency to every resident above the age of 5. We went door to door with this exercise. We were also able to provide some hand sanitizers, gloves, in a limited numbers. Mr. Speaker, South and Central is relentless in its effort to beat the spread of the COVID. We have made every effort to keep our residents and visitors free of this dreaded disease. Mr. Speaker, again, in an effort to assist and erase the burden of the residents of South and Central Eleuthera, I embarked on a food drive that provided nutrients for the human consumption along with protective care of our elderly, medical supplies from bedpans, disposable undergarments, masks, gloves. Our food drive would have provided meat, poultry, grains, cereal, soup, canned vegetables, eggs, frozen sandwiches, pasta, fresh vegetables, and other food items that focused on our children and focused on our children as well. Mr. Speaker, during this food drive, South and Central, along with the friends and donors, were able to feed over 2,000 families. And may I stop? Mr. Speaker, there is an organization in my constituency called, it's a restaurant and bar and a resort called Tippies. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I would like to take my hat off to the owners and the operators of Tippies, Mr. David Barlin and Mr. Elliot Rowe and his team, who have given over 10,000 meals from the time they started throughout the constituency every day. And Mr. Speaker, if I may, they have raised over $55,000 in pursuing this effort. And so now that their funds are running out, I'm going to pledge to the public for some assistance for that program. And if anyone chooses to assist, they can give them a call at 422-9494. Mr. Speaker, again, an effort to eradicate the coronavirus that was unwelcome came to our shores. This food drive was conducted as a drive, and we also conducted it as a drive-through. Mr. Speaker, let the record reflect that the Member of Parliament for South and Central left no stone unturned when it came to the safety and well-being of my constituents. Mr. Speaker, it is regrettable. It's regrettably noted that Eleuthera received its first confirmed COVID-19 case in the month of August. We were 5 months into the pandemic before our first confirmed case. Mr. Speaker, one would note that into the first 5 months of this pandemic, Eleutherians, it is a deadly virus. Very seriously, they took it very precaution. They took every precaution. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately today, I cannot say the same. As some of our residents, after being cleared for the first 5 months, were now feeling more relaxed in their effort to fight and beat this virus. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased. So would you please allow me to speak directly to the residents of South and Central Eleuthera, my fellow constituents. This is no joke. I have fallen victim, but for God and His grace and mercy, I was one of the fortunate ones that was able to fully recover, having isolated for 14 days, not being able to hold the hand of a spouse, or give a hug or kiss your children. It is a terrible feeling. Having gone through the exercise, I think lockdowns home with my family any day. I will take it any day, as opposed to 14 days of quarantine or hospitalized. My deepest sympathy goes to those families who have lost loved ones in this devastating. Please, South and Central, let's continue to protect ourselves, our loved ones, our friends, our communities, our Bahamaland, and let's continue to adhere to the emergency orders and govern ourselves accordingly. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I must take a look at what took place in the media yesterday in this country. I don't ever recall as a member of this government being led by any or ever a dictator under this Free National Movement government. Democracy in this government is transparent and also accountable. So then the rumors that's on the street, and when we hear the members comes in this house talking about dictatorship, is absolutely untrue. Mr. Speaker, every member in this honorable house knows the protocol and where it comes from. Mr. Speaker, I also, at this time, would like to take note and say to my constituents that I do apologize to you, Central in particular, for the dilemma that we found ourselves in last week with the water issues. At this time, I want to take my hat off to the member from Long Island, the chairman of the board, Mr. Gibson. I want to thank you. And whether Eleutherians knew, whether I knew what was going on or not, I knew what was happening every step of the way. Mr. Chairman, it's not an easy road, but thank God there are persons like you are there who are able to find the irregularities and to set the record straight and to protect the rights of the Bahamian citizens and Eleutherians in particular, Mr. Chairman. And to the Prime Minister, I give you hats off as well. And I dare not say anything else on that matter because it's going a bit further. Mr. Speaker, in closing, our children have recently sat the external examination, BJCs and BGCSEs. Mr. Speaker, some of our kids will have walked into a classroom for the first time and be introduced to certain levels of studies. Some may never have heard of certain aspects of their subjects. After sitting in a classroom with an instructor who is trained and well qualified, some of our students would have come out with shining colors, high achievers, because they applied themselves. Mr. Speaker, they paid attention to their teachers and instructors. They went home and they did their homework. Parents assisted. Some of them needed extra tutoring for the things that they did not understand. Mr. Speaker, in this vein, I say to all unsundries, especially South and Central Eleutherians, please, prior to March 2020, we have not heard of COVID-19. We sat in the classroom of our homes, in our organizations, in our churches, and we learned from those persons who would have studied, would have had experience with similar viruses. And we listened and we went home and we were applied what we were told and also what we were asked to do. Social distancing, washing of hands, wearing of masks, and proper hygiene. Mr. Speaker, the record would reflect. We passed the test because we prepared for it. We studied, we listened, we went to social groups. We also learned that we watched the world and how they prepared and how they studied. We learned from their achievements and their disappointments. As to how we should sit our test, which is the COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, we would have passed it in flying colors. Some of us let our guards down, feeling overconfident. But I want to send the clarion call to the Bahamas at large. We will never know too much. We must continue to listen and take directives from those in the competent authority, persons, where it may be government or church, leadership, civil organizations, medical personnel, our doctors and nurses, who see this every day, who lives this, who go to bed having nightmares as to what could happen. Who am I? Who I am told at times want to shake, who at times want to shake it into us, to listen to people. You have to beat this virus, whatever it takes. Mr. Speaker, South and Central is prepared. We are ready. We are geared up. The fight is on to beat this deadly virus that has hit our shore. And so South and Central support the extension of the emergency order. And we await the directives and instructions from those qualified medical professionals whom we have the utmost respect for. We would return to the classroom and pass the COVID-19 test in flying colors and restore the freedom and fullness of life of our citizens. Mr. Speaker, South and Central ends as I began. Psalms 46, verse 1 says, and I quote, God is our refuge and our strength, a very pleasant help in trouble. South and Central Lutheran, Mr. Deputy, support.
Thank you, member for Central and South Eleuthera. As many. The chair now recognizes the member for North Eleuthera. North Eleuthera.
Mr. Deputy, I rise here tonight to lend my support to something that I personally feel needs to be done in order to prepare and enable this administration to move forward in dealing with this problem. This pandemic is a very, very dangerous and destructive virus that while we may not be able to stop it immediately, I think if we take necessary steps, we can slow it down and save lives. There has been quite a number of recommendations that I feel should be incorporated in the fight. To fight this deadly and contagious disease. I do not wish to share numbers because you've heard them over and repeatedly. But those numbers represent lives and people who we know. We have lost some of our brightest and bravest individuals in this country. Lives gone too soon. But I think back to July 1st, when those 4 months, within those 4 months, Mr. Deputy, we must have done something right. With 104 cases, 4 active cases, 89 recovered, and 11 deaths. While 1 death is too many, that, Mr. Deputy, felt more acceptable than where we are today. I would argue that we were on the right track. And even the government, who realized that a lot of lives were being troubled or being put on hold, or people couldn't or had a difficulty dealing with what they were facing. We moved, and some would say too quickly, to try and regularize our way of life. We are a friendly people. We are a people who like to mix and mingle. But this pandemic speaks against that. This pandemic tells us that we must stay a distance, that we must not be up under each other, hugging and kissing and embracing like we too often like to do. The way forward is not easy. And I look at what we're being asked to do, and I understand the concerns expressed by those opposite, and even some of our colleagues. But we must go forward, because we must fix this problem. In the early period of the pandemic, I too, like all of my colleagues, involved ourselves in the distribution of food all through my various communities, providing hot meals in just about all of my townships, providing vouchers from friends and families to those that were in need. So we understood what shutting down our country or taking a pause to allow the health professionals to get it all together. We took those steps. And it's going to require, Mr. Deputy, that we take additional steps. And that is why I embrace the suggestions that have been imparted by our colleagues and those even opposite. We want to get back to where we were. Many of us, if not all of us, enjoyed the life that we once lived. Often it is said that the Bahamas is the playground where the gods and the angels come to worship. We want, like many would say, our lives back, when we don't have to rush home before a certain time. We want our lives back when those loved ones of ours have died. We too want to join in with the family and pay our last respects. But under the current circumstances, that is extremely difficult or impossible. And the things that we do are not different from what they're being done around the world. If you listen to some, you would believe that we are making these things up. But check, all over the world, steps are being taken to mitigate the further spread of this deadly virus. And mind you, this virus acts in an unpredictable way. Some will get it, and it's just like the common cold. Some will get it, and it'll be like a bad flu. And then some will get it, and you will die. And the problem we have is not the ones who get it and feel like they just have a common cold. The problem we have is the availability of beds for those who are affected gravely by the sickness. We all know that Princess Margaret was challenged prior to COVID. And even with the help of doctors and all of the other private medical institutions, Mr. Speaker, the challenge is, if we have a massive outbreak of those that are gravely ill, what do we do with them? And so while I support this, I speak to those that are in authority. Let us embrace measures that has been suggested that we try, and we just recently increased our bed capacity, but it still must go even larger, because we are now going into the winter seasons where it is my understanding that transmission or transmitting will even move at a greater pace. Mr. Deputy, it's not an easy call. And plenty of people are worried about it. And plenty of people are scared from the moment this pandemic hit this country. My 83-year-old mother has been out probably 10 times in 8 months because she is highly susceptible. And I do not want to lose her. And that appreciation is shared by many throughout the length and breadth of this country. And that is why we must win this war. That is why we must do everything in our power to stop the further huge outbreaks of this disease. And so I say to you, let us adhere to the protocol. Let us wash our hands. Let us wear our masks. Let us socially distance ourselves. And to borrow a phrase that my good friend from Elizabeth said, let us treat everyone as if they are positive. And then we will get past this. And in closing, I just want to say to my constituency, we recently had outbreaks in North Eleuthera. And a lot of our people are concerned and worried. And I don't want them to feel that we are not monitoring this and we are not concerned. And that is why we're going to take steps to ensure that further spread does not take place. And you will be hearing about these plans in the very, very near future. Because as we get ready to open up our economy, because we have to find a balance of staying safe, but allowing persons to resume their lives on an incremental basis. And so, Mr. Deputy, I support it on the basis that we must move forward, but we must be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for North Eleuthera. As many. Chair recognizes the member for Pinewood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. As always, I rise by the grace of God and for the good of Pinewood. This has been a very, very interesting debate, and it has been very, very diverse, as debates should be. This has caused me to realize why they call the place Parliament, which is parley, because of the diversity of opinions and thoughts and disposition. Sometimes it's very, very difficult, unless you're leading a charge, to be so scripted when you have so much content coming at you. Let me take this moment in my contribution, Mr. Speaker, to take advantage of that very, Mr. Deputy, to take advantage of that very same listening ear from some of the notes that I would have taken. I think at this time, I'll probably start with our leader of the opposition, who isn't here. I find it very interesting that a senior individual, and I say this not disrespectfully, but as a point of reality in the QC, upon his leaving, he made it clear that, he has to beat the curfew. Where clearly anyone who is in Parliament, especially me as a novice, know that the Constitution affords that nothing can hinder a member of Parliament from the operation of his duty in this Parliament, and that includes the emergency order. I don't need a QC. I don't need a QC to tell me that. Now, if you want to leave Parliament, leave, but don't make up excuses or reasons. Just go. Nobody can stop you. That's your right. You can leave. But don't say it's because of something that the law clearly exempts you from, because we are functioning in this place. It actually protects him from arrest. You can't arrest a member of parliament, if someone, correct me if I'm wrong, coming to this house. You know why? Because that's not dictatorship, that's democracy. The democracy want to ensure that no government could all of a sudden lock up all the opposition and stop them from coming to the House of Assembly. You understand? But I start on some of the points because he raised a lot of points, and I found it disappointingly amusing that he voiced that he has a plan, and he came to the House to debate this very extension, and he failed to bring his plan. Then he went on his break and came back again and still didn't bring the plan he failed to bring. And I say that with a degree of disappointment, but not necessarily too much surprise. But then you know what? Disappointment is expectations not fulfilled. So that's a contradiction, isn't it? Because I was hoping for it, because we do need all hands on deck. We do need them. All hands on deck. I've heard them say the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Right now, COVID is all of our enemies. And so red, yellow, black, and white, whatever it is, all of us should be friends against this common enemy. But I sit and I listen to what was articulated as a plan, and quite honestly, the vast majority of it, of that which was substantive, reflect what is already being done. But some of the things really caused me to be taken aback, because one of them, he was saying one of the plans was that every Bahamian citizen should be tested. Did I hear that correct? Everyone should be tested. And I sit there as a novice here, listening to one of the most seasoned parliamentarians in here, said something that in my mind said, you know, have you really considered this? Let me give you an example. 400,000 of us. If we would even begin to test every single Bahamian, by the time we reach halfway, everybody at the beginning of the line must qualify again for testing again. It's an impossible feat. But two, this country has been impacted by all kinds of serious ailments. AIDS was a serious pandemic, a definite death sentence. COVID is a maybe death sentence. AIDS is a death sentence. And yet, the protocols for that, as with cancer and everything else, is when you have symptoms, you present the symptoms. And the symptoms triggers the need for the testing. But let's look at this plan recommendation. If we were to even begin to say we can test everybody, even at the lower cost, unlike what Goldenal said, that the testing was over 200. Right now, testings you can get now for some in the area of about $125 plus. We'll be looking at almost $50 million to test every single Bahamian. $50 million, and by the time you finish that, logic would dictate you have to start again. Because all of that would have been to naught. And then at a time right now with the government bending over backwards and extending as best as can the food aid, and to the point that we now, because of necessity, had to reduce the subvention in food aid, now that $125 is more than what is being given out in food. What I'm saying is we must be reasonable and we must be sound in what we're considering. And it helps me, it causes me to say in my heart, Lord, I'm glad he's not the competent authority. Mr. Deputy, I am disappointed because we have abused the word competent authority, and we have politicized it so much
that we cause a serious misrepresentation of the fact that people, when they use it without clarity of thought. And for those who know better, abuse it. A democratic country put in its constitution something that was significant, and it will not put something in that is significant that is against democracy. One thing a democratic state fears most is that is dictatorship. And there is no way in a democratic constitution that they would deliberately leave room in it for any kind of dictatorship. The mere fact that we must stand here in this place and debate every extension of this bill is proof enough that this is no dictatorship. No man can wave a magic wand and say, I will. You will what? No one has that authority. When the public error is made, we have to come back to this house and again go through the debate and the processes to reinstate these same orders that we are using as an excuse to brand the competent authority as a dictator. When sense do you repeatedly vote on dictatorship? Once that is done, you need war to undo it. But we do this over and repeatedly because we are stirring up political mischief. And we're playing on the emotions of hurting people. And Dr. David Island says something that I keep in my heart when I go to my constituents, because sometimes some of them do say unreasonable things. I ain't see you, I ain't do this. I said, but I've been to your house 3 times already, bring food for you. Sometimes they come and they say things, and the first thing I try to look at them through the lens, and I must realize what David Allen says, hurting people hurt people. Don't take it personally. Your job is to help them. So I have to face them. That's why when during this the lockdown and COVID, we doubled the staff in my constituency office. We took the constituency office number and tied it into a cell phone and said, people need that phone answer when it rings. Whether I could help them or not, they will get an answer. And sometimes when I give them an answer, I turn back around and I say in my heart, I know that may be today, but God may bless me no more. And many times I surprise them the next day because I found something. In the times of need, there's no time for me as an MP to hide. It's no time for me to be irresponsible because the safety of my family is as important as yours. But I'm there as much as one man can be who is not omnipresent. But we call this thing, and we try to brand it a dictatorship. That is wrong, and that is totally, completely irresponsible. Do you think we like these orders or an extension? Quite frankly, if there's even a shadow of dictatorship and to silence the voice of the people, wouldn't it necessarily been just wise to say, no, well, let's extend this for a year. We ain't got to go back to the people. Let's just kill that and call it that. Why is it that we keep coming back month after month after month? You know why? Because in the hope of this government, we hope the next month we don't need it. The debate for me of this extension is not, oh, we will lock you down for another month. It is for us to have the tool and the capacity to do what we need to do because we don't know what next month may hold. It is for us to hold the one constitutional tool that allows us to cut through our bureaucracy and allow us to respond immediately to the needs of our people, to keep that tool on hand. We may need to use it in November, but that doesn't mean we want to use it in November. It's not about control. I look at my prime minister. He just became prime minister for you all who don't know that, But the man's dedicated his life work to the medical field. So his calling and life work is saving people's lives. Imagine the conflict when the burden of prime ministership is upon his shoulder and he must choose between the conviction of saving you and the economy of saving the country. And he got to sit there and he got to balance two things. One is his nature. Every doctor that came and say, "So you see these numbers, shut it down completely." But as a wise ruler, he said, something, I have to take the baby and balance it out. They say a man never drifts far from his propensities, but as a leader, brother, you got to put yourself aside. You got to make the right decisions for your people. They call it a dictatorship, and I watch on Facebook and I watch on the feeds when you got nauseated by the amount of frequent announcements and updates from our Prime Minister and the Minister of Health, but you're all saying every day we hiding something. I watch with disappointment as the chat go down with the Prime Minister on addressing the nation. You're worrying about his haircut. You're speaking about him derogatorily. If that was you, but any other person, what some behemoths will do. Tell all us where to go. Sometimes you can't even get a kind word in your efforts to try to help. I look at these things and I sit here and I wonder, and let's get a picture of what this competent authority is. This is nothing new in our system. When you create a concept, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, I'm just a simple man. But you don't build an anomaly in your constitution. Everything in your constitution must be consistent with itself. I am a creature, I am of the animal, I'm not a plant. I can't graft a piece of bamboo into me and it grows into my body. The Constitution cannot graft something that goes against it. A democratic constitution cannot graft something into it that goes against its nature. And so here it is right now, the Constitution finally has come into life. I would say something, I'm probably say it another time, that shows us about the times that we live in and the divine timing of our Prime Minister. We was at heads of government in Jamaica. And I had a chance, he and I had a private moment riding in a car. And I'm a church man. And I said to him, I told him, I said, Prime Minister, you ever notice the typology around your rise to power? I say, do you notice the synergy between you and Winston Churchill? And I did not know until I see us in this world war that we're in, what it really meant. I never knew. And I said it to him. I said, take a look at this. Just like Winston Churchill. Nobody wanted you to be in power and everything else, but you came in. Nobody thought it would be sensible to pick election day on the one day in the Bahamas where we had our war. The one war. You remember that? That was our war. Winston Churchill came into power as a result of the war and the World War. I even sit to him and I reminded him about one lady in the House of Commons. Her name eludes me now, who always vehemently attacked Winston Churchill so much that there was a quote attributed to her where she went to Winston Churchill and said, listen to him. She hated him so much, say, if you were my husband, I would poison your tea. Winston Churchill turned to her and said, if I was your husband, I would drink it. And there was a female member in this house who at that time was vehemently at him like that. I said, sir, and there were many other things that I showed him that just to my spirit, I say, there's a reason why you came to here, not realizing that just like Winston Churchill, God brought a leader into this country during wartime, an unlikely leader. And who would think we had had so many battles that none of us caused? But we're standing strong. And if we bore the words of Winston Churchill, we're fighting the woods, we're fighting the streets, and if we got to throw every brick at COVID, we must get together as a nation and stand strong against this enemy which is called COVID-19. We must. We call it a dictatorship. I sit here and I wish the leader of the opposition was here because I wanted to ask him. Our Prime Minister stood up and said, listen, I would rather lose an election than to lose a country or to lose a people. I want to ask him from the way they're acting politically, what you're trying to say, you want to win an election over our dead body and the death of our economy? Is that what the opposition want? Could we put this politics aside? Don't you know we're still 18 months away? And if you think you could keep this disrupted for 18 months, we will be dead as a nation. We need all hands on deck. Who is the competent authority? The competent authority, like I said, is consistent with our Constitution. Do you know that the Commissioner of Police, and any lawyer could correct me, is the competent authority for the police department? The Commandant of the Defense Force is the competent authority for the Defense Force. The Commissioner for the Prison is the competent authority for the prison. Marvin Deems is the competent authority for them collectively. Because the Defense Force can't tell the police force what to do. Your parents is the competent authority in your house. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is the competent authority in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Do you think that any of these people, and Greg Davis, Philip Greg Davis is the competent authority in the PLP? Do you think any of these leaders, any of them, no matter what stance they may have to make, any decision that may have to make, even if people don't like it, do not take consultation from around their table? Do not have their ComStat meeting and their leadership meeting? Do you think that? The competent authority in this country is still the constitutional cabinet. But the unique thing is that tool gives us the ability to be nimble on our feet, to cut through the red tape and be able to do what we need to do in a crisis time that ordinary governance could not do. I listened to our Minister Sands and some of his recommendation. The same extension of this order keeps us within the ability to do that. If the Prime Minister has to wake up in the morning and commandeer a hotel on behalf of the Bahamian people and take every room and make it into a hospital, the only document in this country is this order that gives him the authority to wake up, pick up the phone and say, we want that hotel now. My people need it to live. Outside of that document, how long do you think it'll take for him? Negotiation, this and that, all kinds of things. You come to Parliament and you die. This is not a document of bondage. This is a tool to be able to react to you and for you. It's a tool to keep you safe. And I repeat, outside of this document, the government does not have the constitutional authority to do what we need to do. Right now, we will still have to be tendering contracts for Doctors Hospital West to get those beds up. That was able to be done like that. Because why? The authority was vested. Let me show you something about the competent authority too, just to bring this home to some of us. Guess who the competent authority is? We. Oh, really? Let me tell you why. I won't say the first name, but I know him. Mr. Major, I heard Mr. Major on one of the shows when the recent, the order before this was passed. And I heard him on the morning show and he was saying, and he was happy, and I'm proud of him for it, saying how some of the orders literally took in his recommendations of changes that need to be done. Yes, some of you were disappointed your changes wasn't in there. You know what that meant? That his recommendation came through, so guess what? He was the competent authority. He added to it. When I sit here and listen to our Prime Minister read, listen carefully, sometimes you got to listen as it relates to churches. He said churches are allowed to be open, blah, 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 blah. According to what? Listen to what he says. According to the Christian Council COVID-19 dictates and the Ministry of Health. Guess who was the competent authority in that? The Christian Council. Am I wrong for my interpretation? Isn't that what he always say? The churches are open according to the Christian Council dictates and the Ministry of Health. And guess what? He approved it under his signature. Now let's put everybody in a box for a minute. I want to break it down. I need the small man to understand this man. I need the small man to understand this. Let's pretend businessmen know nothing about met. You want to pause? Go ahead.
Chair recognizes the member for Central Grand Bahama.
Mr. Deputy, I do rise to ask that the business of the House go beyond the 7 p.m.
hour.
Being second and third and fourth, that the House proceeds, business of the House proceeds beyond the 7 p.m. hour. As many members that are in favor remain seated, those opposing would rise. The resolution is passed that the House proceeds beyond 7 p.m. this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Let's assume this breakdown for everybody. And as always, I don't claim to know all. I always stand to be correct. I have a problem with that. But let's take just a good look at what we're dealing with. Let's assume, because we know there are overlaps. And I don't want to be country, because some doctors are also businessmen. Some businessmen are in the medical field. Some businessmen may be doing other things. Some businessmen are clergymen. But let's put them all in their own individual box. And let's keep this thing of this competent authority. When the competent authority makes the decision, he meets with the Chamber of Commerce, doesn't he? And he consults with the businessmen. Obviously, he can't meet with everyone, but he does that, and he factors their position. Then he meets with his doctors in the medical field, and he factors their position. But you got to realize he and his cabinet must consolidate all of those positions and come up with what is best collectively for all. And what that simply means is some got to give, some got to take. That is what is happening. It's not one man in the room ignoring everybody and blacking out everybody and not listening to anybody and just doing as he like. Actually, quite frankly, I remember clearly how you all was complaining that you're tired of seeing the man talking to you on TV and giving you blow by blow. And this country, every single day, you get an update on what's going on with COVID-19. I listen to my good brother, Dr. Sands, and even the leader of the opposition. And I get cautious how people compare apple and oranges and everything else. And
You mean the member for Elizabeth?
yes, the member for Elizabeth. The member for Elizabeth and the member for Carolina, Rumkey, and San Salvador. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. How they mix apple and oranges. And so in the most simplistic way, let me bring something home to you. I heard him mention Barbados, and we love Mia Motley. She's a gem of her own kind, and I think she's a gift to our times. Wonderful leader. I heard him mention St. Lucia, and I heard him mention Jamaica, and they broken it down by the thousands and the rates. But let me just use something simple to help you understand, we ain't them. We can learn, but you got to understand we're unique. Let me show you something. How much airport you think Jamaica get? I think before. I count every single one, even the little one. Jamaica got 4 airports. How much airport you think Barbados got? How much airport you think St. Lucia got? Let me ask you all something. How much airport you think the Commonwealth of the Bahamas have? 41. We count all. We count everything. Yeah, I count everything. That is an airport. 41. 700 islands, rocks, and keys. 2,000 rocks and keys, and they count them all over 2,000. 100,000 miles of square miles of water. Border among border among border. Then you get the opposition leader. And I'm not saying this disparagingly about Haiti. Haiti was problem with data collection, transparency, and everything else. And the opposition leader saying as good as Haiti. And we must understand, who we are. All doctors will say the medicine got to fit you, Remdesivir may be good, but let them give you a 100-pound frame, a 500-pound frame dose of Remdesivir and see how good it is. Let them do it without checking your dispositions. So the medicine must fit us. I listened to Dr. Sand. I think he has some wonderful recommend. The member for Elizabeth, the member for Elizabeth, and he had some wonderful recommendations. But see, numbers are a tricky thing, And I wish he's here to correct me, but I think when he said about communicable and non-communicable diseases and the death toll before COVID, it was 5.5% in 1,000, eh? That's how you know.
We were already suffering from non-communicable diseases, and out of the seasoned doctor's mouth, and I have no reason to not believe him, that the communicable diseases was overtaking the non-communicable diseases. So, in other words, the two of them was bad. Then COVID hit, and COVID feed on those things. What greater reason for us to have a tool in hand to protect our people who are already predisposed because of their African heritage, the AIDS factor, our social disposition, and our communicable and non-communicable diseases, to be able to ensure we don't kill ourselves in the arena of the parks and the beaches and other things. Man, think about it. You can't say one thing and ignore the elephant in the room. So we need to sit here and digest the data appropriately. I had a question, and I was concerned because I wanted to order a bunch of masks, cheap masks for Pinewood as well. And saying, okay, we need to lift the tariff on masks. I disagree with that now. Mind you, I still wish I can get some other masks. But the reality is now, that decision to bar the mask by the Prime Minister has, in 6 months, created a $10 million homegrown industry. You think I can touch that now? We done can't feed everybody, and I can suck $10 million out of the creativity of the Bahamian people. I need you to think about this. These are people who, because they're making masks, don't have to rely on the system. And quite frankly, if you translate that back into the system, that's probably $20 million in savings for the government, because that's less hassle. See, you only look at the food you get. You don't see the logistical cost and all the other costs associated with the 10-cent food you got. See, you only saw that I came to your house to give you $20. But you don't see I spent $3 in gas, take up 2 hours of my time, and you don't see all the other costs that go with it. So I can't support that. And and I agree, because even with my Golden Girls, I still sit there and I get goosebumps and tingles. But I'm afraid for some of us who sit there and I don't care quarterback over their successes. And I ask all of us, how many of us appreciate their level of sacrifice, commitment, and that they made to get where they need to go? And how many of us contributed to them, but they were just little barefoot island gals walking around and they wasn't champions? How many of you believe in them at that stage to get them where they need to go? It is like COVID. We got to fight it at this stage so we all could rejoice in the success of overcoming this COVID-19. Right now, the government is positioning and doing its best to position us for some sort of reopening to begin to inject life back into this. But we are counting on the Bahamian people. Let us not be our worst nightmare. I am calling on all our political leaders. Let's drop the politics, man. Let's save some lives. Let's eradicate this disease. This is critical. This is no dictatorship. This is democracy at its finest, because we are here right now with the ability to debate and present. So when you're asked to come to the table, come to the table. Don't dodge the table. Don't dodge the table. Come to the table. Make your contribution. Make a difference. Tell the truth in love. Stand strong, because together we all can get through this and make this thing happen. That was when we had that opening. 4,000. 4,000. Let me end with this, because I know you're all quick to say politicians always believe in Bahamian people. Let's look at the statistics. When we as a nation, and this is important, brought this COVID-19 to a stalemate. Man, notwithstanding, a second wave comes. So that's a given. That's almost expected, even though I don't think all of us counted on it. We've rushed over there despite the Prime Minister,
You have a minute,
pleading and begging, don't go, don't go, don't go. Then we criticize him for pleading and begging, because the dictator ain't gonna beg you not to go. He can tell you, stay here. And he begged, And almost 5,000 of us, over 4,000 of us flew over. Then they came back and we criticized everybody for blaming us. Then the data came in and said about 1% of the infection came in by way of guests. Then we look at our islands that are sterile. And as soon as you say lockdown, people fly to these islands, and islands that we kept safe because of this order, safe, so that they can have normalcy. People run from New Providence and infect those islands. We must be our brother's keeper. We can track clearly how this outbreak spread throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. When the first two gone to Abaco, and course Abaco that was under development and reconstruction, they literally had to come to a house. When the one tried to fly to Cat Island, I think they caught him on the plane, was able to catch him on the plane. When people were getting to spread through, we have the data. Bahamians, it's up to us to be disciplined. Let's point the finger at ourselves because it's a sex belong to all of us. So with that, Mr. Deputy, and I really have some stuff with my constituency, but I'll talk to them on a video podcast. With that, Mr. Deputy, Pinewood support this extension for the exact reasons that were stated in this contribution.
Thank you, Member for Pinewood. As many. Chair now recognizes the member for South Sinance. Sorry.
Mr. Speaker, it is a pleasure to rise today to wrap up the debate, which has been long from this morning. And I notice those opposed have decided to leave and not to physically vote, to cast their vote. Mr. Deputy, through you, I'd like to thank the Speaker for the courtesy he gave to each and every one of us who are not speaking from our chair in this unprecedented time of persons not being present. And that is we're thankful for the extension he's given to us. Fortunately, I will be fairly brief today because the speaker before me covered a lot of the salient points that I wanted to cover. A lot of the people and the noise in the market is against the lockdown. I don't like the lockdown. I hate the lockdown, and they're blaming the emergency powers and this debate. The speaker before me made it very clear, so I won't repeat it. The emergency powers are under the Constitution framed by our forefathers and adopted and being followed by us meticulously since 1973. I'm sure if they weren't right, one of those hotshot lawyers out there would have already brought a judicial review to question it. Silence. Some persons have said, bring in another law. The Emergency Powers Act is based on a long tradition of being able to deal with emergency powers such as wars and pandemics from way back when. We incorporated that in the Constitution, as the member before me said. The forefathers made sure that happened so we could move quickly to do what we had to do. The first proclamation took us to the 17th of March, then to the 29th of June, the 31st of June, the 31st of July, the 30th of September, 30th of October, and now to the 30th of November. The first case in the Bahamas was what? March 1st. March 16th. April 10th, we had 42. 31st of July, we had 232 people in Nassau. 14th of August, 717 in Nassau and 761 in Grand Bahama. The tests in those previous days were 4,286, 7,000. And then by September 23rd, we've done 18,000 tests. We're 33,000 tests by September the 23rd. And the list goes on, 34,000 tests, 4,900 people in Nassau, 4,725 in Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, let's look at also the movement in these emergency orders. We've had, I think, when the new one comes out tomorrow or whatever, it'll be, I think, emergency order number 9, if my memory serves me right. At one point, only Nassau was locked down. Then, because, as we said, we heard of travel different, and the spread went from island to island. And I remember Michael sitting in this chamber saying, why not open Michael? Now, we have seen a lot of those areas have been opened. Grand Bahama is open. Virtually the entire Bahamas is open for full business, apart from Nassau and Abaco, and not the Abaco Keys, Nassau Paradise Island. That is all that is really locked down. So progressively, you call the man a dictator, he has opened up the country as best and when he could to allow people to go back to work. The member before me also spoke about religion. I see from the computer that maybe an apology has been issued about a comment made that the competent authority was not religious. If he was not a religious man, if we had we would not have allowed the Christian Council, as the member said before me, to decide on people that can go to worship. That is one thing they can do in Nassau. On Saturdays and Sundays, they can go and worship and get solace from their God. That's not a democracy. You know, when people break the law, the police have reminded a lot of people they don't lock them up or shoot them in democracy. In dictatorship, that's not what they do. So we have so this debate today is steeped to the highest extent in democratic values from a country that worships its constitution. And anytime we have a problem, we run to that thing and we say, it's against the Constitution. This is not against the Constitution. We might not like it. It's in line with the Constitution. It's in line with the powers and contained in the Emergency Powers Act, which are embodied in the Constitution. Now, we don't like it. Some of us don't like it. That might be an issue. We heard how persons jumped on the plane and went to Miami and did this. This spread or the disease we have has been a result of an internal issue. I stand, as a member before we said, I stand correct. I don't think a single tourist brought this issue here. So we had the Prime Minister and the Cabinet had to act, and they locked down the country on successive orders. We have opened it up. We are now seeing that come November 1st, the country will be open for tourists to come in with the gold standard test 7 days before you come, and then the allergen test, on arrival and 5 days out. That is progress. That is, as we said, balancing between the medical view of locking you down completely and opening up and putting the country back to business. You cannot tell me that the big hotels like Atlantis and Bahama will open up their doors to guests when our numbers of COVID are high. It would be economic suicide on their behalf. So we need to get these numbers down. Right now, on the bright side, for those members from the Family Islands are should be posed for the greatest tourism uptick out, because they can go to Eleuthera, they can go to Grand Bahama, they can go to Maikau, Abaco Keys, a number of these places. We should embody that and use that opportunity to make money for ourselves, for the taxi drivers, for the straw vendors, and so on and so forth. So therefore, we have that ability. We have that ability to move on. Yes, Nassau is the biggest percentage of our population, but we have tried to balance this issue, 30 odd deaths, against opening up. We're going to start on November 1 with opening up so we can have businesses go back to work. When the country was closed, what did the government do? Extended unemployment and benefits, millions of dollars, came to people's aid, food program. The member for Cat Island says one of his points of whatever 3 or 4 he got out was to feed the people. $1.3 million a week the government is putting in to feeding Bahamians, and he says we should feed the people? That's a program that's already in place. And not only in that 1.3 million, quite 33% or 35% of it is being donated, or above that, is being donated by the private sector over and above what the government is putting in. So a massive amount of food is going out there. What have we tried to do? The Minister of Education has tried to make sure we have education continuing through a live platform. The health issue. We've been able to get the Samaritan's Purse. The member for Cat Island said more testing. Well, we've had the numbers of testing. It's gone from 4,000 to we're now up to 34,000 tests. The level of testing is the allergen test, which has come down to, $25 or whatever it is. It's down from, and as we said, if we tested every single person, it'd be some $50 odd billion. He wants to hire more people for contact tracing. That has been done. So there's nothing out of his recycle plan that hasn't been helped Bahamians to understand how they can reduce the risk. As a member before me said, the Prime Minister was on the news and the Minister of Health telling us over and over again, sanitize, wash your hands, wear a mask, stay inside. How much more can we tell the Bahamian people what to do? We've tried it each and every way. Then they say, do more. But the minute this government comes here to borrow money, oh, you're borrowing too much money. So it would be lovely to have a purpose-built COVID center at the hospital at a point where our national debt, you complain, and the next day is going out of control. You cannot have both. So the delicate situation that the government has been trying to do is balance each against each other. It would be lovely to have a new hospital. But if you drive by the hospital today, you'll see the emergency wing is getting renovated. They've added more rooms. We've had the Samaritan's Purse, and the list goes on. We have more contact tracing. Sure, there is fatigue. But a lot of this fatigue is being brought on by negativity as well. If we continue to be negative about the situation we are in, we are never going to get out. We have to get these numbers down. The other day in Grand Bahama, unfortunately, the numbers, I think, went to 15. I think the numbers of persons per 18. You're seeing a uptick in the Grand Bahama numbers. The two members here were agreeing. After a long period of having them down at 1 or 2. So we have to be able to move quickly to be able, if that is a problem, to deal with it. South Eleuthera and North Eleuthera here, their numbers were down low, and then all of a sudden there was an uptick. So something had to be done about it. And these emergency powers give you the right to do that. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, the emergency powers is a non-issue. Those who have criticized it and do not want to vote against it, to vote for it, have not shown an alternative, a viable alternative as to what else could be done. So they come and criticize and leave, but have no proposals on what can replace this emergency power. We heard from the last speaker, and I've heard the Prime Minister say it to us. You know, people think that the Prime Minister doesn't consult. We had a Zoom meeting on Saturday. I think it was like 3 hours we discussed all of this, all of us in our caucus. At least 3 hours. All of us put our point of view across. We ask questions, et cetera, et cetera. I can tell you that the member for Killarney no more wants to keep this country locked down than fly in the air. So because we've extended the order, does not mean it will be used. If we are able to get this under control, more of the Bahamas will come out of lockdown very quickly. The tourists will start to come back. We start to build the economy. Now, I'll be the first to say there are some things in this, in the way it's been done, I don't like. So I think we need to work on that issue. So, for instance, I saw the COVID ambassador said someone couldn't park on the side of the road by caves because they were on the beach. Well, you know, those are issues I think we need to work out in implementing, because people should be allowed to at least park on the side of the road and see the sea. You can't go to the beach. Don't stop me from seeing the sea. So I think, and you know, it's 1 minute past 12 if I'm still in the water. So I think there's those issues, and I think that's what's got a lot of people frustrated. It's the way it's been implemented. Yes, there have been mistakes. For any of us to stand up here and say that the government did not make mistakes would be foolish. You think of the A to B could shop on Monday and whatever day could shop on Tuesday. That didn't work. So we changed it. But you know what? I'm the designated shopper in my house. I got to put my cart in front of me and the next person because they jamming up on you in the cash register. Keep your 6 feet. You know? Very simple. Don't go to the funeral. We got 100 people. Don't jump on your boat and go to Rose Island or Exuma. It's very simple. So it's the enforcement issue that we need to deal with. Now, those of us who have been compliant are obviously frustrated by those who are not compliant. Now, you heard them talk about Airbnbs, you go and party. Let's be responsible, because you know what? Those people will complain about this, but the minute their ma or their grandma get it, they'll be saying the government did not do enough. It is our responsibility to beat this disease. And we have to take it seriously. We can't fool around with this thing. Because we are getting to the point now where Thanksgiving is a couple days away, which is we're leading into our high peak tourist season, which starts to come in through the winter, goes through Christmas, and goes out. We need to get those hotel workers back to work. We need to make sure this country is safe. We need to get the airlines flying in, because that is the largest percentage of our economy. We can say change it, but in the foreseeable future, tourism and financial services are going to carry the burden until we can grow the 80% more, 8 times more crops that we need to grow, or do whatever we have to do. So, Mr. Deputy, today is as I conclude, is an example of the democracy at its finest. Under an issue of great disease, persons in hospital, we knew, as we heard, the hospital was having its problems beforehand. You know, the member for Elizabeth will tell you, I've told you many times in this spot, when he came to be the minister, there were wards at the Princess Margaret Hospital that had been out of order for years under the watch on the other side. Out of order for years. There were people on gurneys in the hallways. That was a problem we had. So when you add the strain of 132 people dying, 109 hospitalized, you have a serious problem that each and every one of us has to take seriously. So if I can leave one message with you, the emergency powers are needed. They may not be used. But as we move forward and we have the new emergency orders, which we publish tomorrow or the next day, please let us, each and every one of us, be our brother's keeper so we can fight this disease. And God willing, we will win if we all get on board. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I move that the motion be put.
Thank you, Member for St. Anne's. That's many. Chair, I recognize the member for Central Grand Bahama.
Mr. Deputy, I rise to ask for a division of the House prior to voting.
Second.
Being moved and seconded that there be a division of the House. The clock. You want me to read it? You want me to read it? Huh? It's been moved and seconded that there be a division of the House. The chair now requests that the clerk carry out a division of the House. Do you agree with the resolution or not, Mr. Member for Northern Andres and the Berry Islands?
Yeah.
Hey, Mickey, excuse me. David. Northern Andres and the Berry Islands.
Mr. Clark. Just 1 second, please. I know you'll take. Hey, the vote.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Who did that? Honorable members now. That was out of order. Please don't do that.
Yes. Yes.
After people using resolution. Page 14. Please. Honorable members, these are the results of the division on the resolution before us. The yea has 14, the nay 0, abstentions 0, and the absent 24. The motion is carried and the resolution is agreed. Further resolution. Members' statements. Appointment of select committees. Instructions to select committees. Discharge of select committees. Notices for future meetings. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Central Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to renew all notices and names of members of the government.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Adjournment. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Central Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House at its rising to adjourn until Wednesday, November 4th at 10 a.m.
The seconder.
Second.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the House adjourns to Wednesday, the 4th of November, 2020 at 10 a.m. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Final adjournment. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for East Grand,
So moved.
for Central Grand Bahama.
So move. I move for final adjournment, Mr. Speaker.
Second. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the House adjourns to 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 4th of November, 2020. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The House stands adjourned to Wednesday, the 4th of November at 10 a.m.